Are all councillors ready, please? Okay, before we go live.
So are you ready?
Still haven't done that right, David. Very bright.
Can we just turn the lights just down a little bit on the top table, please? It's a bit bright on us. Could you go live now with the live feed, please?
Good afternoon, everybody, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this meeting of the South Planning Committee here at Theatre 7. We have quite a few members on the committee this time because it's a new committee after the election. I'd just like to make sure everyone's mobile phone is switched off, please, and that members and public can behave in orderly fashion so we can hear what the speakers are saying and also hear what the members of the council are saying. So no more to do. I will now ask each councillor to introduce themselves, please, starting with Councillor Parsons, please.
Tony Parsons. I'm councillor for Basin Hill, Colham and Sutton.
Richard Marshall, I'm councillor for the Worfield ward.
Nigel Lumby, I'm councillor for Albrighton.
Hilary Luff, I'm councillor for Church Stretton and Craven Arms ward.
Could I have Caroline, please? Could you like to introduce yourself, please?
Sorry, I didn't realise I was next. Caroline Bagnall, I'm councillor for Broseley.
Andy Boddington, Ludlow North.
Richard Huffer, Clee. Nick Hignett, councillor, Ray Valley ward.
Dave Tremellen, Highley.
Robert Tyndall, I represent Bratton Clee.
I'm David Evans from Church Stretton and Craven Arms Division, and I'm also chair of this committee. And now I'll ask the officers if they'd introduce themselves, please. And then Miranda's got a few house notes to read out as well. Thank you.
Graham French, Planning Officer.
Ian Kilby, I'm the Head of Planning Services.
Miranda Garrard, Solicitor.
Gemma Lawley, Developing Highways Manager.
Thank you. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a brief housekeeping note. There are no planned fire alarm tests this afternoon. The theatre operates a managed evacuation procedure and you will be assisted and directed by a member of theatre staff to the nearest fire exit in the event of an evacuation. The assembly point is Frankwell Short Stay Car Park. Toilets are located on the riverside of the building on every floor. The wearing of masks is mandatory when in the theatre building but may be removed if you are speaking in committee. And committee, please do remember to remove your masks to speak so that everybody can hear you. Please observe social distancing rules at all times. With regard to application number 19055660 OUT, the Chair has used his discretion to allow additional speakers and to increase the time available to the applicant to respond accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. We have none today. Thank you. Could I confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of April 2021 for those who were present? Could I have those as a... Thank you, Councillor Tyndall. Seconded. Thank you. All those in favour of the minute, please. Thank you. That's all the members. Now we've got a minute of also the 20th of May. it was held for election of chairman and everything else. Could I have a proposal for the minutes, please? Thank you, Nick. Seconder, please. I'll second from the chair. All in favour, please. Thank you. Public questions. We have no public questions. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Anyone got any pecuniary interest in this application, please? No, none. Right, we move on to the application. I'll ask the planning officer, Ian Kilby, to introduce the first part, and then he'll hand over to the planning officer, Graham French, for the rest. Thank you. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. We have before us today a significant planning application that has been with the authority under consideration for the last sort of 18 months. It represents a large strategic site, and members can see a slide show at the moment depicting some drone footage of the site in its context. Around 140 hectare or 350 acres, located in the Severn Valley to the east side of the county on the border with Telford and Wrekin. A more detailed description of the site and situation is set out in section 2 of your report. The previous power station, constructed in 1963, ceased electricity generation in 2015. It represents significant challenges and opportunities as a site with large areas of previously developed land and buildings that need to be dealt with. The Harworth Group acquired the site in 2018 and has been developing its master plan for the regeneration of the site through consultation meetings, exhibitions and discussions. The planning application before committee today was submitted in December of 2019. A very small part of the site falls within the jurisdiction of Telford and Wrekin Council, and a separate planning application has been made to that authority. And that was considered by Telford and Wrekin on the 18th of May. The application before you today is in outline. There are no details apart from the access points which you're being asked to consider today, but you will see that there is a master plan, and members have had the benefit of a site visit, a tour of the site and the context, and you have a copy of the master plan drawing before you at your desk. There are 2 new access points proposed from the A4169 Much Wenlock Road, and we visited those yesterday. And those will be provided following the completion of 250 dwellings on the site, should planning permission be granted, where the main access from the Bildorse Road will be closed to domestic vehicular traffic. And that's the access point over the River Severn that we drove through to the main site yesterday. The scheme's been developed with this master plan that's been revised through the last year or so following the consultation and negotiation period, and that's brought about changes to the access points amongst other matters. Committee's been asked to consider the principle of development and to agree a mechanism for the delivery over a build-out period that's likely to exceed 10 years. It's probably likely to be closer to 15 years before this site is finished, should members be minded to support it today. It would make provision in accordance with the sustainable design principles, which is set out in your report at pages 16 and 17. The application would make provision for up to 1,000 homes, a retirement village, 7.5 hectare of employment land, a new school, allotments, sports pitches, and provide additional connectivity through walking and cycling opportunities that establish and connect with existing footpath and bridleway network. There's a rail link that members saw on the site visit that used to be used to supply the site with coal when it was a power station, and provides the opportunity to assist with the remediation and removal of material from the site, and in the future has the potential for other rail access via to enhance the sustainability credentials of the site, perhaps as a tourism or other leisure-related facility. So, In terms of the policy, this is an opportunity site. It is not allocated in the current local plan, but it is identified as a strategic development site in the emerging local plan, which will be presented to Council shortly for authority to submit to the Planning Inspectorate for consideration. And I want to refer members to the executive summary on page 14 of your report. The application site is included, as I've just said, as a strategic site under Policy S20 of the Emerging Shropshire Local Plan. And that would need to satisfy a range of criteria under the master plan for the site for the development to proceed. These are set out in paragraph 6.1.2 of your report at page 27. The application's been submitted in advance of the local plan due to the practical operational considerations linked to the acquisition of the site by the applicant, the Harworth Group. However, it's not considered premature in advance of plan adoption for reasons set out in this report, and I refer members specifically to paragraph 6.1.3 through to 6.1.6. There's been extensive stakeholder engagement through the consideration of the application, much of it undertaken by the applicant, and a comprehensive consultation process has taken place involving 3 separate formal consultation exercises. As I've said earlier, this is a cross-boundary application with a small part of the site falling within the boundary of Telford and Wrekin, which resolved to support the application at its meeting of the 18th of May, just about a month ago, subject to conditions and a legal agreement that has been sort of jointly developed with Shropshire Council officers. Shropshire, however, is the lead authority and is expected to determine any future applications linked to the current proposals. There's a related application to extract mineral on the western part of the site, and that forms a separate item on this agenda. The objective is to create a level development platform for the master plan housing and to avoid sterilisation of the mineral beneath the site. The point here is that mineral is only found where it exists, and should there be a development proposal or pressure, then we do need to consider and address the benefits of removing that mineral for supply into the market. A viability assessment provided by the applicant concludes that the master plan is financially constrained given the significant costs of remediating the brownfield areas of the site. This conclusion has been accepted by an independent viability consultant that was jointly appointed by Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin councils. Accordingly, there is finite funding available for the infrastructure delivery, totalling £16.75 million, and it has not been possible to deliver the full policy-compliant level of affordable housing. 5% is offered rather than the policy requirement for 20%. Additionally, it will need to ring-fence all of the SIL revenue expected from the scheme in order to deliver the infrastructure which is required specifically to deliver a sustainable scheme. The viability assessment supports the inclusion of proposals in the western greenfield part of the site, which members saw on the site visit yesterday, and within the application and under the emerging policy S20. This is in order to ensure a financially viable scheme which can subsidise the significant costs of remediating the brownfield area and which the applicant has nevertheless commenced at risk. This is a demonstration, I'd suggest, of the applicant's commitment to the project. Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin officers have worked hard to identify the infrastructure spending priorities needed to support the scheme, based on detailed discussions with relevant consultees, and a spending schedule is set out at the beginning of Appendix 1 of this report. That's on page 66. Notwithstanding these financial constraints, officers are satisfied that sufficient funding is available to deliver the sustainable scheme, which has the potential to deliver significant benefits both to the public and the local environment, which include a number of sensitive protected designations. The master plan for the site by the applicant has been informed by considerable stakeholder engagement and planning consultation. The proposals have attracted a number of objections, and there are a number of people here today to speak on the points that they have raised. So many of these points were covering the issues of traffic impacts, highway impacts, and a detailed traffic modelling exercise has been undertaken by the applicant's highway consultant in close consultation with 2 highway authorities and Highways England. Now, this has demonstrated to the satisfaction of the highway bodies that the highway impacts of the proposals can be made acceptable, having regard to the mitigation proposals put forward by the applicant, and also the trigger points for those interventions, bearing in mind this is a significant scheme that, if approved, would take 10 years or more to develop fully out. The scheme has been amended and further information has been provided in order to take account of the detailed comments received during the planning consultation process. Now, whilst the Parish Council objections referred to remain, there are no outstanding objections from other technical consultees, including ecology, historic environment, drainage, or our tree team. A further briefing note was shared with committee in relation to the highways issues in response to objections received last Friday. So to conclude, this is a significant scheme which does have the potential to deliver major benefits to Shropshire in terms of housing, employment and environmental enhancements, and the remediation of a major brownfield site, the like of which I can't think that we've got elsewhere in Shropshire. Officers are satisfied that further information and amendments now received are sufficient to facilitate a sustainable development which will be informed by the applicant's master plan and a sustainable design brief. And the proposals are considered to be compliant with the development plan overall and relevant national policy and guidance. The proposals are therefore recommended for approval subject to the conditions and the legal agreement terms listed in Appendix 1. I'm now going to hand over to Graham French, who will discuss some of the sort of planning issues in more detail. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian. Could we have the PowerPoint, please? Thank you. I'll just go through that very quickly. You'll see the location of the site which members visited yesterday. The next slide should show the that's the environmental designations around the area. We noted that it's a sensitive location. We have the World Heritage Site, which is to the east, the A1B, which is to the west, the setting of the Buildwas Abbey Ancient Monument, which is to the northwest, the River Severn, a number of treble SIs to the south, and obviously some significant rights of way in the vicinity, and other heritage assets, listed buildings linked to the World Heritage Site. So all of these factors have been taken into account in the applicant's application, visual surveys, heritage surveys and such like, which I'll go into a bit of detail in a minute. If we could have the next slide, please. So this is the master plan, and it shows the various elements of the site, which would be coming forward in a phased manner over a period of perhaps 10 to 13 years. If we move forward, we'll see that the phasing, the individual phasing plans, if we could just have the next sequence of slides, please. Sorry, this is just the visualization, shows what the site may look like in 15 years' time when it's sort of matured with the vegetation, landscaping all delivered. Sorry, next slide. So this is the first phase, the first year, and you'll see that there's the grey areas indicate where development would be occurring then. It's mainly in the southwest part of the site. Moving on quickly, because there are a number of these, we're undertaking further works in the southwest side of the site. In the eastern side of the site, mineral extraction would be occurring if another application to be considered by this committee is approved in accordance with the recommendation at the same time. Next slide, please. So we're moving on, and we'll see that there's some development now starting to commence towards the river corridor outside the floodplain. Next slide, please. And so the site is progressively starting to move from its southwestern corner where the where the cooling towers were, and in towards in a sort of generally easterly direction. We're looking at about year three, I think, at that point. If we can move forward a bit further, we're talking about developing the village centre in around 2023, 2024. And then as we move forwards, and if we can have the next sequence of slides in succession about the next 3 or 4, we have the access onto the Wenlock Road being delivered, and also a T-junction a bit nearer to the river. And so we have a change in the aspect of the site, with the principal accesses being off the Wenlock Road and the road bridge onto the Bildwas Road, which is the existing site access, being closed down. And if we could just forward to the end of that, then we can see that the very last phase of development is the eastern area of the site, where the mineral extraction would be taking place until year 5 or 6, and that will be the final housing block within the site. I'll move through the highway slides. There are about 5 of these, because I'd like Gemma Lawley, Chair, to comment on those, the Highway Officer. We're looking at therefore, if we move forward to the residential sections area, that's it. We could just see the indicative appearance of houses separated by landscaping, but bearing in mind this is an outline application, so all of these matters in detail would be related to reserve matters. I beg your pardon, I'm looking at the site in a reverse sense, so in fact my east is my west, so apologies for that, but the principle is the same. So moving on, there are a series of principal rights of way which run around the site, and the proposal is to actually link up to those by providing new rights of way within the site. And there's been a lot of correspondence from cycling and equestrian and footpath people, and I think to confirm that the intention is to formalise routes through the site which link to the existing public rights of way. So in addition to sort of human non-vehicular connectivity, if we go to the next slide, we also have wildlife connectivity. There are a series of green corridors within the site. The principle has been to try and bring the existing wildlife around the edges of the site. So we have Tickwood and Benthell Edge, Trebless Eye and Ancient Woodland and various fairly mature stands of trees associated. And the intention has been to establish green networks within the site. I think we saw yesterday at the site visit that these areas are large and there's a lot of existing trees and grassland and such like. So they have significant potential to be managed in a sustainable way. So just moving on, we have the connectivity that I mentioned in the next slide, which shows the general landscape strategy that's being adopted with that. And then we have landscape sections, the following slide, which shows that, as members noted yesterday, the site is on a slope as you move away from the river at least. And the proposal is to sort of use the slope in ways that enhance the natural landscaping of the site. And the minerals scheme would set it down where it's relatively elevated at the moment, which would give it some additional screening for the final phases of the site. So just moving on, finally, there are some little vignettes which show how kind of key areas within the site might appear with sort of landscape courtyards and sort of internal open spaces. So quite a lot of potential for sort of innovative open space design and management in the reserve matters stage. We have a number of viewpoints finally. So we're looking at the site. The top slide is from the direction of the Dale End Park. We have an elevated property on the other side of the river. I mean, we noted yesterday quite how vegetated the area is and quite how secret the site is in terms of the views to and from. I think that the next So the slide before shows that there are some intermittent views from within the World Heritage Sites, but the evidence of a visual effect doesn't necessarily amount to an adverse impact. I have gone through the slides now, and very quickly I will just highlight some of the key environmental elements that the site has raised, but I will leave highways to my colleague Gemma Lawley, Highway Officer. So in terms of drainage, the Environment Agency is satisfied that keeping development outside the floodplain will ensure there will be no increase in downstream flood risk. The applicants intending to exercise a statutory right to connect to the main sewerage system. Telford and Wrekin Council have highlighted existing flooding issues at Ironbridge, which any mains connection scheme will need to take account of. Technical solutions likely to involve provision of some buffer storage capacity within the site to ensure sewage can be introduced to the main system where there is sufficient receiving capacity. Appropriate conditions on water management have been recommended. In terms of ecology, standoffs have been maintained between the proposed development of the adjacent woodland areas, including Trebless Eyes and Ancient Woodlands. 2 pinch points exist where the normal 50-metre standoff would reduce slightly. However, a construction environmental management plan and tree protection plan ensures these designations can be appropriately safeguarded. Some redundant buildings at the site have been occupied by bats. The applicant has actually constructed a luxury bat house for mitigation purposes under protected species licence as demolition works proceed. The master plan has been amended to improve the green network connectivity within the site, as we saw in the previous slide. 20 ponds have been provided in order to provide mitigation for great crested newts and other amphibians and reptiles which were in the site and have been translocated to facilitate the demolition works which are ongoing and nearly completed now. So the applicant's ecology reports make appropriate provision for nesting birds and other protected species. A biodiversity net gain calculation indicates proposals would deliver an uplift in biodiversity within the sites. Council's ecology section is not objected and has recommended conditions and advisory notes. In terms of trees, a tree assessment identifies protection measures within the site. Discussions with the applicant have led to the retention of some linear poplar groups originally identified for removal, but would actually provide valuable screening for retained buildings within the site. There's no objection from the trees team, subject to conditions. In terms of noise and dust, a noise report establishes background levels and predicts likely future levels at identified receptor properties both during and after construction phase and including road traffic noise. The report concludes no significant residual effects from noise and vibration are anticipated. Construction working hours as specified in Appendix 1 will be subject to an additional restriction for noisier operations. An air quality report confirms that air quality and dust management would not have an adverse impact on the environment or adjacent amenities and can be adequately controlled through condition. Council's regulatory services team have not objected. They recommended a condition to manage any ground contamination which may be identified during the construction works, and this is included in Appendix 1. In terms of stability, a stability report concludes that proposals don't raise any significant issues regarding ground stability. This is despite the general presence of ground stability in the surrounding area. The conclusion is really that effective engineering works will apply, which should have the effect of ensuring there is no stability issues with future development of the site. Stability in a kind of ongoing way will also be addressed within the site and reviewed as part of the construction environmental management plan, which is being proposed for the current application. In terms of hydrology, most of the site falls outside the flood zone, and the outline master plan generally shows development avoiding this area. This will be confirmed as the reserve matters applications come in. The site's not located within a groundwater source protection zone, and there are no licensed groundwater abstractions within 500 metres, though there are a number of nearby licensed discharges. The Environment Agency is not objected, subject to monitoring conditions which will exercise control on water discharges through the environmental permitting regime also. Council's drainage team is not objected, subject to surface water management condition. In terms of heritage consultees have indicated that proposals may result in less than substantial harm to the setting of Buildwas Abbey Ancient Monument and the Ironbridge World Heritage Site and Conservation Area. The term less than substantial harm is a term that's introduced in the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 194 to 196, and it implies that there may be a need for some mitigation were that to be the case. The visual and heritage information submitted by the applicant indicates there will be no intervisibility between the site and Buildwas Abbey. And I think we saw that this morning when we were standing at the proposed roundabout on the Wenlock Road. Sorry, like yesterday's site visits. Very limited intervisibility exists between the site and the World Heritage Site. You see from the level of trees in the vicinity from our visit to the Rowing Club site yesterday. Hence, any less than substantial harm would be at the lower end of the scale and is capable of being mitigated by measures put forward in the application. It's concluded that the tests set out in paragraph 196 of the NPPF regarding less than substantial harm to heritage assets can be met. Council's Historic Environment team has not objected. Current proposals do not involve any direct works to Grade 2 listed Albert Edward Railway Bridge, which we saw yesterday. Bridge strengthening works to facilitate the development would be undertaken by Network Rail, but this would be subject to a separate listed building application. In terms of landscape, I'm nearly finished. The site is over 141 hectares in size, of which about 44.5 is greenfield. Only around half the greenfield area will be developed. The remainder will be used for ecological and open space purposes. Over 28 hectares within the brownfield area will be open space in the form of sports pitches, parkland and woodland. Landscape and visual impact report concludes the proposal will result in some limited landscape and visual impacts at localised level, but the effects would not be significant overall. Council's landscape consultant has reviewed the LVIA and has accepted these conclusions. In terms of sport, the applicant's leisure strategy makes provision for new combined locally and neighbourhood equipped areas of play, so LEAPs and NEEPs as the acronym is. Multi-use sports pitch and pavilion, including parking area, to be secured by 106 agreement and associated conditions. Additionally, there will be a central village green and connections to the surrounding green infrastructure. In terms of education, proposals would involve provision of a new primary school within the site at about year 5 or 6, plus funding for additional secondary provision. There was initially some difference between the Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin models for educational provision. This ultimately resulted in additional funding for secondary provision, but now both local education authorities are satisfied with the level of funding which the scheme would deliver, which is 9.5 million in total for education. In terms of healthcare, the proposals make allowance for a £500,000 capital payment plus provision for a service plot which would assist in establishing a new healthcare centre at the site, should this be required by the clinical commissioning group, whom we've had regular meetings with. The CCG has advised that the 3 local healthcare practices are approaching capacity, and recently they have requested a larger capital sum of 1.27 million. CCG has not yet fully defined or evidenced the nature of the increased healthcare requirements, though some further information has been provided recently, as referred to in the additional representations report. Officers consider at the moment that the 500,000 capital sum is acceptable at this stage, given the limited funding available and the context of the development. Further healthcare funding may potentially be available under the proposed viability review mechanism in the Section 106 legal agreement if an evidence need can be confirmed. We will continue to talk with the CCG, and there is another meeting scheduled quite soon. Rights of way, the applicant's proposing a number of new non-vehicular routes across the site, which I mentioned in the slide presentation. Additionally, financial contribution for enhancement of the 7-way promoted footpath route in Telford and Wrekin has been agreed, as has a contribution towards management for existing footpaths in Benthell Edge and Tickwood Trebleseye, which is managed by the Seven Gorge Countryside Trust. Viability, Ian has mentioned the viability constraint to the site, so I won't duplicate what he said, and I am on the home straight now. But I just wanted to add a bit more in terms of affordable homes, which obviously it's unfortunate that the scheme cannot afford to deliver the full complement of affordable homes, which would be 20%. But I just wanted to emphasise that we've gone through an extremely detailed viability review mechanism, which has involved the council appointing independent consultants, together with Telford and Wrekin, preparing a detailed brief. That consultant has gone through all the detailed facts and figures that the applicant's consultant has produced and is satisfied that there is a significant viability issue with the sites. That has resulted in the £16.75 million that is the total amount available for spend. And that is contingent on the 5% affordable home delivery. Now, I want to emphasise that may be viewed as a minimum, because there is a viability review mechanism in the legal agreements which has been agreed by the applicant and recommended by the Council's viability consultants, which would engage every 5 years. And if there is an excess of profit over what has been assumed by the applicant's viability consultant, then that money would be clawed back. And I can assure members that the very first priority in that would be to re-establish some policy compliance with respect to affordable housing. I think additionally, I would note that it will be expected under the sustainable design brief and from the way the master plan has been prepared, that the site will itself provide a sustainable balanced housing mix within it, which will be controlled under the Reserved Matters application. So it will meet a social need, if not fully initially, the affordable housing policy expectation. So I won't do a conclusion because that would just duplicate what Ian has said. I would like to bring the highway officer in, if I may, after this, but I just wanted to draw members' attention to a couple of errata in the reports. Firstly, in section 4136, it refers to Telford and Wrekin's committee meeting on the 18th of June. That should, of course, read the 18th of May. In section 11 of the report, the portfolio holder is wrongly listed as Gwilym Butler, the previous holder. This should, of course, read Ed Potter. And finally, the date of the schedule of the additional representation should read 15th of June and not the 22nd of October. Chair, if I may, I would like to pass this over now to Gemma Lawley, the Highways Officer. And could I ask that the slides are reversed back to the beginning of the Highways slides as well, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. If we could have Gemma, please, to come in. Let Gemma speak first. All right.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at this committee meeting regarding the Highways Matters. As you've briefly seen, we've put forward a couple of slides to give a brief overview of the Highways Matters, just to try and inform the debate. But obviously, as we go through, I'm happy to take any questions and concerns that may be raised by committee members. As previously outlined, this has been a complex development from a highways perspective, and it's relied on the cooperation with the neighbouring authority, Telford and Wrekin, the applicant, the highways consultant and the relevant stakeholders, to include the local parish councils, town councils and the local members. In terms of the likely impact, then it is a significant site for Shropshire, and many of the objections received are on highway-related grounds. From a highways perspective, there are a number of matters to consider. So we need to understand the existing use of the site, that it is a reuse of a brownfield site and it does have an existing use, the impact of the mineral extraction and during the construction period. Also, we need to understand the phasing and how the internal and external infrastructure is being phased and developed, but most importantly, the impact on the surrounding highway network to try and understand where the visitors and the residents and users of the site will be travelling to and from. So where possible, we've tried to anticipate the likely impact and in terms of but I think the important thing is to say that the scheme will be developed over a number of years and this will be phased and monitored. So in terms of the development itself, there will be a number of off-site and on-site highway improvement works provided. We will go into a bit more detail of these in due course. As part of the application, some of the works are on the Telford and Wrekin network, most namely the Castlefields roundabout and the Ironbridge traffic calming. This was in response to the early phasing of phase 1 and phase 2 will be accessed off the Billswash Road, so it's to address those. The majority of highway works are on the Shropshire Council network and they will be delivered in various different ways. So in terms of, we've got access works for the northern and southern access, which I'll go to in a little bit more detail. Other off-site works will be delivered through the developer themselves, with traffic calming, like I've mentioned, in Ironbridge, a roundabout scheme at Buildwas Bank, the upgraded Castlefields roundabout, and traffic calming in Buildwas, Leighton and Atcham. These are all controlled by planning condition. Finally, we'll be seeking a highway contribution for the Gaskell Arms junction, and I'll discuss that in more detail in due course. Go to the next slide, please. Okay,
Thank you,
So
Gemma. Is that it?
So, oh, can I, carry it? Sorry.
Yeah. All right.
There's 3 access points into the site. The first access will be the utilisation of the existing access, which will be for phase 1 and phase 2. The works at this junction are controlled by condition, and the intention is that once phase 1 and phase 2 is fully constructed, then this access will be closed to vehicular traffic, and it will be pedestrian and cycle access only, with potential bus route to be explored in the future. The northern access, which is at the top of the slide, initially this will be for a simple T-junction, and it will be used for construction purposes, and then it will be open to the public. But there's a planning condition that states that it should be completed by the 400th occupation for signalisation. So we'll go into a little bit more detail in due course on that one. And the southern access, which is to the right of the slide, that is proposed to be a roundabout construction, a full roundabout. So, go next slide, please. Okay, so as discussed, the northern access will be a simple T-junction in the first instance, and it will provide access for construction traffic. When that comes forward, it will be subject to technical review, and at that stage we'll assess the construction, but also the vehicle speeds on the approaches, which has been raised as an issue. It will then be constructed into a signalised crossing, which will provide a toucan crossing, and also access to the private drives for the properties adjacent. We consider, from a highways perspective, this is acceptable from planning purposes, and technical details will be submitted, and it will be subject to a legal agreement and safety audits. You go to the next slide, please. So as previously outlined, and as members visited on the site visit yesterday, the access to Mill Farm, there'll be a fully constructed roundabout. The location of this roundabout has been amended through the planning process. So it was to incorporate the access into Mill Farm Drive. There'll be an extension to the existing 40-mile-an-hour speed limit, which will tie up with the 50-mile-an-hour speed limit, not the de-restricted as shown on the drawing. We consider this will provide a gateway to the development itself and hopefully reduce vehicle speeds on the approach. It will be constructed towards the end of the developments. This is due to the mineral extraction and also the phasing of the development itself, and will be subject to a planning condition, which requires it to be constructed within 5 years or on the 400th dwelling occupation. We're satisfied again that sufficient details have been submitted, and the initial design was subject to a safety audit, but will be subject to further reviews and legal agreements. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we wanted to just provide a little bit of background onto how some of the highway assumptions have been made. So initially, the application was submitted in 2019, and this was accompanied by a transport assessment. However, a decision was made between Telford and Wrekin, Highways England and Shropshire Council that we would use the strategic model, or the applicant would use the strategic model in order to better inform the likely impact of the development itself. The scope was agreed with Telford and Wrekin, both local authorities and Highways England, and was used. Data that was collected in June 2019, which was pre-COVID, was used to inform the model. The highways assessment is based on a worst-case car-heavy scenario, and it doesn't take any account of the potential rail use or the increase in working from home post-COVID conditions. It's accounted for all committed and planned development in Shropshire Council and Telford and Wrekin area. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the transport model, what we work on is the likely distribution. So it was informed by the 2011 census data, which is standard procedure for transport assessments. I think the main thing from the committee's members' point of view is to note the distribution and the likely destination. So from a Shropshire Council perspective, the key ones are approximately 14% will be travelling between Shrewsbury and Oswestry, or the Shrewsbury and Oswestry direction, 5% towards Bridgnorth and South Shropshire, and 5% towards Whitchurch and North Shropshire, Chester area. The majority of the traffic, it is anticipated, will be travelling towards the Telford and Reeking and the West Midlands, which accounts for approximately 75% of the trips generated by this development. Okay, so during the consultation period and engagement with the transport consultant and between the local authorities, we've looked at the likely routes, because from a Shropshire Council perspective, the main route is to Shrewsbury and Oswestry, and so is trying to establish the likely route that these vehicles would be taking. So they identified 3 different routes. So the first route would be towards the north of the site, going to the A5 M54 route. The second route would be the B4380, which would be the Buildwas Leighton route. And the third route would take vehicles to the south of the site, down the A4169, along the A458, travelling through the Gaskell Arms Junction. There's quite a lot of debate about the likely route that vehicles are likely to take with this regard. Next slide, please. Okay. So once we've looked at the distribution and the likely impact, we came up with, the applicant came up with a number of junctions that needed intervention measures. So the most key one from a Shropshire Council perspective is that it falls within the Shropshire Council boundary, and the applicant is proposing to construct a full roundabout at the junction of Buildwas Bank. This will include a signalised crossing on the Buildwas Arm, vehicle-activated signs on the approach, and an extension to the existing speed limit. Also, it proposes to restrict the movement, a right-turn movement into Buildwas Road. So this was a key issue from Telford Reeking's perspective in terms of discouraging vehicles along the Iron Bridge Gorge. So the idea being that vehicles will be travelling north towards the roundabout, and they will go around the roundabout rather than making a U-turn. They will carry on up Buildwas Bank and on. So the trigger point for these works is 180 dwellings, and it's controlled by a planning condition. The second bit of intervention shown on this slide is the traffic calming works along the B4380, which is controlled by a condition for traffic calming in Buildwas, Leighton and Atcham. It's identified and looked at the number of vehicles using this route, and it's considered from a highways perspective that this was quite an attractive route for drivers, because basically it's there's a higher degree of kind of journey time certainty in terms of the if you go along the A5 then M54, then you're likely to encounter different junctions. To the south, you go through the Gaskell Arms Junction, which we'll come on to in a short while, and then but the B4380 is a direct, continuous route and provides that better sort of journey time and also driver experience as well. So it was felt through engagement with the local stakeholders that actually in terms of the modelling, there's a bit of uncertainty really in terms of the number of vehicles using that route. And so we got the applicant to undertake further sensitivity tests to establish the likely impact of that. Okay, so the final point really we wanted to make was about the Gaskell Arms Junction, because we've received a number of objections to this element really, and in terms of the calculation of trying to establish the likely impact. So as we've outlined before, in terms of the trip distribution, it's anticipated that a percentage of the vehicles that are travelling towards the Shrewsbury and Oswestry direction will pass through the Gaskell Arms Junction. In addition, those that are travelling towards the Bridge North and South Shropshire, again, will be travelling through. But in terms of the overall percentage of number of trips from the site itself, this is relatively low. However, there is it formed part of the original survey data, so we had an idea. The applicant had an idea of the number of vehicles using that junction already, and undertook further analysis. They did acknowledge that the Gaskell Arms Junction would have an impact, the development would have an impact on the Gaskell Arms Junction towards the end of the development. They therefore put forward 2 proposals for the signalisation of the Gaskell Arms Junction. Gaskell Arms is a very sensitive junction. It is quite difficult to model, and over the years, Shropshire Council has had a look at the junction and come up with various different options. But we considered the options put forward in discussion with Much Wenlock Town Council and the Len local member, and came to the conclusion that a highway contribution was the most appropriate way of going forward. This would give us an opportunity to fully consider the proposals put forward, but then also take into account any allocation within the forthcoming local plan within Bridge North, which the current allocation, but also the potential site at Tasley, which is the current preferred option. So just in summary, in the number of trips that the site is likely to generate, then the majority of trips are anticipated to go towards the Telford and Wrekin direction. There will be an impact on the Shropshire Council network, but from a highways perspective, we consider that the suitable mitigation has been provided at a suitable trigger point. The impact will not be immediate, and the site will be developed over a number of years, which will give us an opportunity to monitor. Any assumptions that have been made within the transport model were car dependent and do not take into account any future options for the light rail or the impact on COVID may have on travel behaviour. Okay, but as I say, I'm happy to take any questions as required through the debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Graham, do you want to come back? Or?
I don't know if it's appropriate for me to mention it now, but the solicitor just passed me a query from Councillor Tyndall regarding why the National Grid building has to be retained on site. Should I respond to that query now, Chair?
You can, yeah.
It's the National Grid building actually channels 25% of the nation's electrical infrastructure through it. If it was not retained on site, then there would be a massive power cuts nationally. It's an essential part of the infrastructure, and whilst there was a power station that was contributing to it, it remains as a significant part of the architecture of the National Grid, so it can't be removed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Right, we now have a list of speakers. I've allowed more today than normal because this is such a huge application. I call on the first speaker, which is David Turner, a local resident, speaking against the application. So if you'd like to take the podium, Mr. Turner, and then you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
I'll give you a 30-second warning before the end.
Thanks. This microphone's live, is it? Thank you, committee, for allowing me to address this meeting. I'm the former Shropshire Councillor for Much Wenlock. I recognise that something has to happen on this industrial site, which has long been a symbol of the Severn Gorge. Some aspects of the proposals are attractive and innovative. I don't, however, support other considerations. I believe that a sustainable development could be created without using many acres of agricultural land. I believe that affordable housing should be provided at the normal Shropshire rate of 20%, as opposed to the 5% that's proposed. And I'm extremely disappointed that so little regard has been paid to the traffic problems that will arise around the site and in the hinterland of the development. I lodged my concerns across a range of issues on this and the minerals application in March 2020. I have subsequently commented on 4 occasions as fresh information became available. In all, I've submitted over 3,500 words on this application alone, which has been distilled at 4.3.1 in the report into a mere 36 words. I'm not especially worried about that per se, but I am concerned that some of the significant issues that I and others have made are not covered anywhere in the officer report. And without those issues before you, a decision may be taken that proves harmful to local residents and to road users in due course. I hope that you've read the letter I wrote to you last week about the potential impact on the narrow lanes off the 4169 between Builders and Much Wenlock. And I've raised the issue before, and they've not been addressed specifically in the officer's report. Officers were present at a site meeting last year when we saw what happens when articulated vehicles turn up the Gaskell Arms in Much Wenlock. Traffic comes to a standstill. We also saw the impact of a combine harvester negotiating the junction. Traffic comes to a standstill. There is no mention of this nor of the traffic on Victoria Road, the narrow stretch of the A458, as it weaves out of the town towards Shrewsbury, which has to informally close to allow agricultural vehicles to pass through several times a day for many weeks during the harvest. There is no reasonable alternative route. There is no mention of the impact of surface water flooding at the Gaskell Arms junction, which can sometimes close one lane. And you won't be surprised to learn, committee, that such flooding sometimes coincides with flooding in Ironbridge, resulting in the closure of the wharfage, the bridges at Cressidge and Atcham, which are covered in the report. The consequence is that traffic then routes hither and thither through the narrow streets in Broseley and or Much Wenlock. Shropshire's emerging local plan review is referenced in the report, but there is no mention of 1,000 new homes in Bridgenorth, although I can see that Graham French has mentioned it now, 200 in Much Wenlock and an additional 60 new homes in Cressidge. The report is also silent on the impact of 100 plus,
30
I think it's 130 plus park homes, soon to be located at Shadwell Quarry next to William Brooks School. All of this will have an impact on the Five Ways junction at Much Wenlock, Gaskell Arms. The applicant has agreed instead that a funding equivalent to £250,000 signalisation scheme should be ring-fenced for use in a comprehensive improvement scheme for this junction. It is implicit that such a scheme will be significantly more costly than the applicant's signalisation scheme, which was rejected as inadequate by Shropshire Council. I have the deepest concern about this apparent shot in the dark.
Thank you.
The junction is wholly contained within the conservation area and is bounded on all sides by several listed buildings. I urge you to consider my and others' concerns and reject the proposal before you today until feasible and fully costed highways measures for all aspects are forthcoming. Thank you, and through you, Chairman, if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Turner. I now call on Mr. Can we have the volume turned up on that or not? Yeah.
Question to the technical staff. Is it possible to turn that microphone up a bit, please?
Right, and I call on Simon Heath, a local resident, please. You take the podium and you have 3 minutes to address the committee, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that and thank you for this opportunity. I'm a local resident from Bridge Farm on the main junction of the A4169 and the B4380, and for over 40 years I've seen many accidents, including fatal, and many more unrecorded collisions and close calls involving this junction. Daily, the junction sees lorries and larger vehicles overshoot the left turn towards Much Wenlock. They then turn around on the far side of the junction. The proposal to place traffic signals on an island at the bottom of such a steep hill will cause serious accidents. These larger vehicles can simply not slow down enough to make the turn or to stop, which was witnessed by some of yourselves on the site visit. The increase in noise, light and air pollution will also be of substantial impact to local residents. Local residents regularly use the footpath between Ironbridge and the caravan park and the main village. Under the proposed scheme, there is no crossing point to allow children or pedestrians walk into the current village school or to the play area or to safely cross to the village pathway from the end of the Ironbridge Road junction. As a heritage and rural tourist destination, the number of ramblers that use the route between Ironbridge and Buildwas is also significant. There is a dangerous section of the Ironbridge Road from the river footpath towards the junction below Bridge House, where there is no footpath, just road. This will increase in with this increase in traffic down this road, it's going to cause an exceptional amount of danger and a significant threat. The inability to turn right down the Ironbridge Road when travelling from Much Wenlock also unjustifiably increases the main junction traffic usage, as it significantly is going to increase the amount of cars that have to double back on themselves. I know I mentioned it won't, but that's what's going to happen. We, on average, have around about 60 vehicle movements from our property a day. This includes lorries and large vehicles, as we run a small business with 8 members of staff, which are coming and going on a regular basis. And we can't actually turn right out of our junction. So we're going to come to the end of our road and we can't get across the road. This is a similar case, which is happening from the other houses across the river from us. The misinformation released showing the average drive west or to Shrewsbury being via the M54 is utterly ridiculous. When surveyed, our local residents came back with 98% choosing the route via the B4380, which is significantly faster and misses out the minimum of 7 sets of traffic lights and 5 roundabouts that are not accounted for through Telford by the Highworth Traffic Survey, which also, on their survey, it assumes near full speed being maintained at all times, which of course is absolute rubbish. When the river floods, as mentioned earlier on, it causes the main river crossing bridges at Cressidge, Atcham, Jackfield, Bridge North and all through routes Swire Bridge and Shrewsbury to be closed. This allows all the traffic to be travelling across Builders Bridge. From there on, we get a 1.5 mile queue from that junction back towards Much Wenlock, and we get the same queue coming back from the Gaskell Arms back that almost meet one another in the centre.
Thank you.
This is ridiculous. We as locals are in support of a smaller development on the Brownfield power station footprint, but the application including the Greenfield areas should be denied, and as the undeniable truth is that the infrastructure simply cannot cope with this proposal. Thank you very much, Mr.
Thank you very much. Any questions from Mr. Heath, please? Yep. Thank you. Right, we now call on Stephen Malloy. Stephen Malloy, please. Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Dear committee members, I wish to raise concerns about the viability assessment that has been submitted with this application, which claims the scheme is unviable if developer contributions have to be paid in full. The applicant seeks to reduce the developer contributions by £16 million and provide 150 less affordable homes, a reduction of 75%. A key input for viability assessment is the land value, and the Shropshire Viability Study states that to define land value for any viability assessment, a benchmark land value should be established on the basis of the existing use value of the land plus a premium for the landowner. Using that approach values the site at circa £80 million. Planning practice guidance said it is important for developers buying land to have regard to the total cumulative cost of all relevant policies when agreeing a price for the land. You would be forgiven for thinking that perhaps the applicant paid in excess of the estimated existing use value of £80 million. But in actual fact, I can reveal that land registry documents show that they paid only £4.25 million for the 350 acres, which represents just £12,000 per acre for the land that could be worth as much as £500,000 per acre. It is my belief that this extremely low price of £12,000 per acre reflected the cost of all the relevant policies like affordable housing, SIL and Section 106 contributions, and even the cost of site remediation. So it's very difficult to see how the scheme is unviable as claimed. The applicant sponsored a Shropshire Council delegation to the French Riviera in 2019 for the real estate show to promote this site, so officers may be prone to bias and overly pessimistic with regard to viability. Planning practice guidance says that viability assessments must be simple, transparent and publicly available, but officers have refused to supply the existing use value or equivalent used in the assessment, so perhaps they can supply that today and confirm if they knew the actual price paid by the applicant for the site. The weight to be given to a viability assessment is a matter for the decision maker, but the viability assessment for this application is not transparent or publicly available and only summarised for committee members, which is not sufficient to make a decision today. There are 5,814 households in Shropshire in affordable housing need, and is something many on this committee have expressed concerns about. So, if only for that reason, I respectfully ask that members defer this decision today for more information to be made publicly available, or just refuse the application for not being policy compliant as it does not meet the requirements of policy CS11
Thank you, sir. Your
and
time's up.
undersupplies by 150 affordable homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Malloy. Thank you. Any questions, please? No. We now go on to Councillor Susan Jones, who's representing Leighton Parish Council. And you have 3 minutes to address the public, please. That's Councillor Sue Jones.
Hello, I'm Sue Jones, Chair of Leighton and Eton Constantine Parish Council. Thank you for letting me address this planning committee. We agree that some development of the former power station site is a good use of a brownfield site. Our concerns with this application are the negative impacts that such a disproportionate size of development will have on surrounding parishes and highway systems. The Parish Council has real concerns over the potential increase in traffic that up to 1,000 houses could potentially add to the traffic problems already existing on the B4380 from Buildwas to Acton. We are told from the traffic modelling that 1 in 6 of the total development traffic will travel to and from the Shrewsbury area. We believe that the majority of this extra traffic will use the B4380, as it's the quickest and shortest route. This will have a massive impact on the life of residents and road safety along this road. Although the B4380 has been shown to have capacity to take the extra volume of traffic, we believe that the traffic modelling produced is flawed for the following reasons. The traffic measurements were taken 2 years ago, so not true to the normal traffic patterns now. The cumulative effects of other strategic housing and employment sites identified in the reviewed Shropshire Local Plan have not been taken into account. These will potentially greatly increase further traffic onto the B4380. The modelling does not take into account local driver behaviour, such as traffic using the Rat Run through the villages of Buildwas, Leighton and Eton Constantine to access the M54. The increase in safety issues due to the type of traffic that uses this route regularly has not been considered. Agricultural machinery, cyclists using the national cycle route, tourist traffic stopping to admire the A1B, and large numbers of speeding motorbikes using the road as a racetrack, and HGV traffic travelling along totally unsuitable, narrow, winding roads all add to the dangers. To obtain real and accurate traffic data, we are asking that specialist fast signs, which measure and record accurately numbers, speeds and types of vehicles, are put in place along the B4380 before any work on the development site takes place. Traffic monitoring can give up-to-date, accurate data which can be used to improve safety. We're asking that a highways liaison group be set up to monitor the actual traffic data and traffic effects rather than the predicted ones until the end of construction.
30 seconds.
We cannot emphasise enough the traffic safety concerns we all have along the B4380. The police are well aware of the issues and regularly speed trap the village of Leighton. We are grateful for the offer of traffic calming measures, however, we are concerned at the timeframes to put these measures into place. We are asking that these mitigating measures are implemented urgently for safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Spot on time. Go on Lorraine Pratt, please. Lorraine Pratt. Lorraine Pratt. Thank you. And you're to speak on behalf of Buildwas Parish Council. And you have 3 minutes to address the committee, please.
Thank you for letting me speak. Buildwas Parish Council objects to this application. We are a very small rural parish of open countryside and dark skies. This development would fundamentally...
Would you like to take your mask off? Thank you.
This development would fundamentally and unattainably change the character of Buildwas. We would, in principle, support some development on the parasite footprint, but a development of this size and scale is too large for the infrastructure of the local area. We have submitted a detailed response online, and I will highlight the key objections and concerns. We have worked with Councillor Wilde, Councillor Sue Jones and resident Simon Heath to cover as many of the local issues as possible between us in this very limited time. The local roads cannot accommodate the increased traffic from a development this size. Mr Heath had already explained in more detail the highways concerns. We already have problems with dangerous speeding and congestion at junctions at peak times. on the rural roads bordering the development. We disagree with the data put forward that the majority of Shrewsbury-bound traffic from the site would go via Lawley to the M54. We know from residents, driver behaviour and online route planners that the preferred route would be the B4380 through Buildwas Village. We are concerned for the safety of all road users and pedestrians with an increase in traffic along this route, and safety mitigations and service improvements would be required if approved. As explained by Councillor Jones, in recent flooding, Buildwas Bridge has been the only accessible route towards Much Wenlock, and the increase in traffic through Buildwas in these situations would be considerable in addition to the general increase from the housing and businesses on the development. The proposals at the three main junctions around the development would have significant negative impact on the current residents from waiting vehicles and light pollution from the traffic signals. We have serious concerns around the junction at the bottom of Buildwas Bank, as heavy goods vehicles overrun this junction on a very regular basis, which would prove fatal with either a roundabout or signalised junction as proposed. We are also disappointed that affordable housing has been reduced well below the usual level to just 5%, as it is much needed in the area. The additional 150 larger homes are likely to have more cars per household, increasing the pressure on the highways network. The development of the greenfields areas would destroy numerous animal habitats, and the mitigations for newts on the sites we believe have failed, and we are concerned that this indicates a low priority given to the biodiversity of the site. We would like to see specialist management of the site in future if approved. Flooding along the river has become more severe and regular in recent years. The development on the green space would remove a significant amount of the natural soakaway and increase the runoff, replacing this with hard surfaces, which would increase flooding both on the recreational areas of this development, which we are in a flood zone, and along the river in Ironbridge. We are also concerned about the capacity of the sewerage network to take on a development of this scale. We have met regularly with Councillor Wild over the last 2 years to discuss the local concerns and highlight areas where mitigations could be put in place should the application be approved. To limit the negative impact of this development of Buildwas, with Councillor Wild will explain.
Thank you.
However, the objections that I've highlighted here around affordable housing, flooding, highways and the loss of habitat largely cannot be mitigated against. Therefore, the Parish Council objects to this application.
Thank you very much for your speech. We call on now Councillor Duncan White, please, representing Much Wenlock Parish Town Council. Duncan White. Thank you, sir. You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to address you. I'm representing the people of Much Wenlock. In the recent elections in May, you all mirrored my personal promise of supporting the provision of affordable housing. You recognised the need in your election campaigns. What happened to our local 20% target? In 2019, a benchmark was set by Shropshire Council with a High Court order against Lansdowne Investment Partnership, a developer of 36 housing units at Hinstock, for a failure to meet a 15% obligation. This development has the provision of only 5% of affordable housing, a 75% reduction. So instead of 200 houses, it will be only 50, a saving in excess of £30 million plus for the developer and a huge loss to the affordable housing. How is this justified and acceptable? The 20% policy has been in existence for some years, and any form of due diligence by a developer must have already identified that. We urge you to support a 20% affordable housing provision and reject this application. The roads in the area are already unfit for purpose. The Gaskell Corner at the A458 and A4169 is already overloaded, but is to have at least 20% an increase in traffic from this development. When testing the Gaskell Corner junction, the applicant fails to include any background traffic from the residential developments at Cressidge and Tasley. Both these sites will generate significant traffic movements that will impact on the Gaskell Corner. The applicant themselves described the Gaskell Corner as the known bottleneck, and yet their own modelling demonstrates that the additional vehicles from the power station development will more than double the delays at the Gaskell Corner. Such increased pollution from these delays is clearly in conflict with the Shropshire Council's climate change policy. Despite this, the applicant's transport report describes the impact on the Gaskell Corner as a relatively minor impact. Doubling the delays at a junction already described in the same report as a known bottleneck cannot, it seems to us, be described as a relatively minor impact. The doubling of the delays at the Gaskell Corner will also lead to a serious increase in rat running through the ancient medieval town. This is completely unacceptable to the people of Much Wenlock. Finally, we read in the officer's report that the applicant did submit a so-called improvement scheme at the Gaskell Corner, which was quite rightly rejected by Shropshire Council. Instead, the applicant will pay the council a sum of money equal to the cost of that scheme, £250,000. The 4 road humps in Shoplat, Shrewsbury, cost the council £233,000. So what are we going to get for that £250,000? Why is it okay to accept a financial contribution equivalent to a failed and rejected scheme? The people of Much Wenlock want to see a scheme that actually works at the Gaskell Corner. This should be the scheme on which the financial contribution should be based. We say to you, reject proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Councillor Claire Wilde, who's the ward member. Councillor Claire Wilde, please. Thank you, Claire. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, please.
Thank you, Chair and Committee, for allowing me to address you all today. This application is 99% within the small rural parish of Buildwas, which is currently just over 100 homes. Only the existing main entrance is within the Telford area. The total site is 139 hectares, including 44 hectares sand and gravel site. To the west is an area of outstanding natural beauty, Tickwood Hill. To the southwest is ancient woodland, and Benthall Edge to the southeast is a triple SSI. I feel very strongly that this application should be refused. Whilst we all recognise the need to clean up and redevelop the brownfield part of the site, building on good quality agricultural land, which is surrounded by such important natural landscapes, should be avoided at all costs. This, together with the lack of affordable housing and 106 monies, the horrendous junction at the bottom of Buildwas Bank, and the impact on the surrounding towns and villages of 1,000 new homes, I feel should compel this committee to refuse this application. There are several important questions that need answering. The officer report refers to a density of between 25 to 30 homes per hectare, page 6, paragraph 1.8. If the sand and gravel site is a third of the total site, then surely there should be a restriction or legal agreement on the total number of homes to be built on the greenfield portion. Page 14, paragraph 4, refers to the creation of a level development platform. This is an area of 22 hectares, which could accommodate 600 homes, or over 60% of the homes on a sixth of the site. Therefore, this application is more about building on green fields with 5% affordable housing than redeveloping a brownfield site. Before making a decision, committee should know what numbers they're giving outline consent for. This is included in my proposed condition number 17. On page 45, you'll find the report about sustainable transport and bus travel. That enjoys a £1 million developer contribution. But the only reference to a bus service is on page 30, paragraph 7, where a bus from the site to Telford will be provided. An electric bus should be provided from the site to Shrewsbury, stopping at all the villages on the way. How can you mitigate in one direction? Condition 16 on my proposals. On page 44, paragraph 6.20.7 of the report, there is a £65,000 contribution to traffic calming in Atcham, Buildwas and Leighton. This is insufficient, and if you cast your eye over the rest of the amounts, you do wonder if this is a typo. I would expect that all of the committee went on the site visits. Did you all travel on the B4380? It is the fastest route to Shrewsbury, and in my opinion, the traffic modelling data did not reflect this. Condition 15 of my proposals. I've also asked on condition 14 of my proposals to change the Shropshire Council proposed conditions for the implementation of highway mitigation from the agreed 150th home to the 50th. This is essential. The kids have got to be able to cross the road to go to school. They've got to have pavements, and we've got to have speed reduction. Whilst I accept that Harworth have done a good job on the clean-up of the site to date, there are very fundamental flaws within this application. The open space, all 70 acres, is to be commended, but the majority of it is on a floodplain. Families face the dilemma of affordable housing, either directly or indirectly. Are we content to let our young people struggle to secure their own home? As you will appreciate, dealing with an application of this magnitude for a small parish has been extremely difficult. To face a tenfold increase in size is like your worst nightmare. It is almost
30 seconds.
It is almost impossible to comprehend the changes to their community. Buildwas Parish Council have worked extremely hard to represent their small community. As you will no doubt have seen, the Chair has raised issues, the Vice Chair has spoken as a local resident, the long-standing retiring Chair has made late representations, and the neighbouring Chair has covered the B4380. So between us all, hopefully, given our limited time slots, we have covered and represented all the local objections to this application.
Thank you, Claire.
If you are minded to approve this application, I ask you to accept all my conditions, many of which have already been through long negotiations, but please think about the affordable housing and the 106 contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Councillor Dan Thomas, the adjacent ward member. Dan Thomas, please. Thank you, Dan. You have 5 minutes to address the committee, please.
Members, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak about this important application. As a newly elected, first-time Shropshire councillor, I really do not want to have to begin my term by criticising the officer's report on the application. And members, let me say at the outset that I am not in any way anti-development. We welcome all the benefits that the redevelopment of the former power station at Buildwas will bring. However, this application, in my view, has serious failings that will have a seriously detrimental impact on the people of Much Wenlock, whom I am elected to represent as a Shropshire councillor and Mayor of Much Wenlock. In December last year and February of this year, Much Wenlock Town Council wrote formally to the Shropshire Council outlining our transport objections to this application. Although relatively short, these written objections provided some technical detail questioning the accuracy of the applicant's transport reports, particularly in relation to Much Wenlock and the Gaskell Corner Junction. Sufficient details, such that we believed justified an answer from our Shropshire Highways team. None was received. Finally, in March this year, members of Much Wenlock Council, plus our then Shropshire member David Turner, held a meeting with Highways officers on Zoom. This was a perfectly well-mannered meeting, but the traffic concerns of Much Wenlock were very clearly delivered. We even went to the extent of our attaching our 2 written Highways objections to the agenda for that meeting. Again, we received no formal response. In paragraph 4.1.2 of the Planning Officer's report, under community consultation, some of Much Wenlock's Town Council's objections are identified. However, this makes absolutely no mention of our 2 written Highways objections. The only reference I can find is at paragraph 4.1.14, where I'm personally quoted stating about concerns in Much Wenlock. This is far too brief. I'm very sorry to say, members, that all the work that we carried out as a town council to provide the Highways Department with what we believe to be a sensible and robust questions about the impact of this development on Much Wenlock, this has been ignored, in my view. It is for this reason I took the unusual step of emailing members expressing my concerns and attaching Much Wenlock Town Council's written objections. I hope you have the chance to read these objections, members, and that you're now able to better understand the serious concerns of the people of Much Wenlock and across the Much Wenlock division. You will note from para 632 I of the report that Highwif's Highway Consult originally proposed signalisation of the Gaskell Arms junction in Much Wenlock. This was not a fully signalised scheme, only partial signals, and that was only one option, and they were completely unsupported by any evidence that they might work. These proposals were quite properly rejected by Highways officers. We note then in the same paragraph that officers are prepared to accept instead the financial equivalent of the applicant's failed, rejected scheme. This completely lets the applicant off the hook. All we are asking in Much Wenlock is this: surely Harworth should be told to provide a scheme that actually does work, and it is that scheme on which the financial contribution should be made. Harworth's traffic will double the delays and queues at the Gaskell Corner junction, a junction they describe themselves as a known bottleneck. These delays will massively increase the rat running through Much Wenlock. Is anything being proposed to prevent this? The answer is no. The 250,000 outlined is completely inefficient for this. In the same paragraph of the committee report, it states that a comprehensive improvement for the Gaskell Arms will anticipate funding from other sources. What sources are these? They are not mentioned in the report. What will the comprehensive improvement look like? Who will deliver it? When? There are absolutely no guarantees, and I'm afraid this is unacceptable to the people of Much Wenlock and across the Much Wenlock Shropshire Council division. Thank you for your patience, members.
Seconds.
Thank you for your patience, members. I urge you to reject this application until such time as the impact on Much Wenlock has been properly addressed and fully mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Right, I now call on Stuart Ashton, the applicant, please. Thank you. You have 8 minutes to address the committee, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Stuart Ashton, Head of Planning at Harworth. Harworth is a leading land and property regeneration company. We are highly experienced in redeveloping previously developed land, including former collieries and power stations. On major projects like Ironbridge, we act as master developer, and we are responsible for demolition, remediation, the delivery of infrastructure and placemaking. Very few developers have the skills, expertise, or financial appetite to take on such a project of this scale. If approved, we will be on site for the next 15 years. We don't simply secure consent and sell the site on. Our aim is to create a new community that is an attractive and desirable place to live, work, and enjoy leisure time. The power station stopped generating electricity in 2015, and Harworth purchased the site in June 2018, nearly 3 years ago. The buildings, infrastructure and cooling towers were deteriorating rapidly when we purchased the site, and so we made a huge financial commitment to start demolition rather than wait to secure planning consent. The demolition process will take about 3 years to complete. The 4 cooling towers came down in 2019, the bunker bay in July 2020, and the tank bay in January 21. The 205-metre-high chimney will be demolished later this year. Thousands of tonnes of scrap metal and asbestos have been safely removed from the site. Throughout the demolition process, health and safety has been our #1 priority, and we have had to ensure that the power supplies from the National Grid building and Western Power substation continued without disruption. In preparation for the redevelopment plans for the site, Harworth ran and coordinated our largest ever public consultation exercise. We held 2 on-site design workshops in September 2018 and May 2019. These involved all the key public and private consultees in attendance. Over 80 professionals helped design the initial master plan. The public were encouraged to visit the site at 2 public consultation events. At the first event, over 550 local people visited the site exhibition, and many experienced a Land Rover tour to enable them to see the scale and complexity of the project. The public exchanged ideas and discussed the project with our design team. Presentations have been made to all the local parish councils. Regular meetings have taken place with local councillors and interest groups. Specific meetings have also taken place with organisations to discuss education, health, heritage, tourism, ecology, landscape and transport matters. We have tried to address the issues and concerns as they have arisen, and the master plan has been amended on numerous occasions. A website has been set up so interested groups could keep up to speed with the changing information. The planning application is supported by a master plan, environmental statement, and by over 220 separate reports and plans. As a result of that level of consultation and discussion, we have undertaken all the statutory consultees either support the application or raise no objection subject to conditions. This is a significant achievement. On a project of this scale and complexity, we are never going to be able to address everyone's concerns and comments. However, we have tried very hard to create a master plan which is innovative, addresses the constraints and promotes the opportunities of the sites. If the application is approved, we will continue to work with neighbouring communities to ensure that there is a positive relationship with Harworth. We are happy to take part in a working panel made up of representatives from Shropshire Council and the parish councils to discuss issues as they arise throughout the development. Extensive highway modelling work has been undertaken in partnership with Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin highway officers and Highways England. The local Highways Authority have confirmed that the highway works proposed and the off-site highway improvements are acceptable, and these works will ensure that traffic from the proposed development can be appropriately managed, and accordingly they have raised no objection to the development. Although not part of this application, it is important to note that Harworth are leading the way in trying to secure a public rail service into the site using the old coal freight line. We have submitted a bid to the government for funding for a feasibility study, and we have agreed to let a company called TDI trial a VLR, a very light rail train, on our private sidings at the power station. The trial is expected to start in August, and the site will showcase their new train to the rest of the UK and Europe. The VLR vision is to develop a lightweight, energy-efficient rail vehicle, and our hope is that this can be used on the Ironbridge site. This will help to reduce the dependence on cars and assist the 600,000 visitors who annually visit the Ironbridge Gorge. A viability report was submitted to both councils in September 2020. This report was independently reviewed by an expert appointed by Shropshire and Telford and Wrekin Council. The conclusions of the viability report are accepted by the expert. Over the last 9 months, officers have worked incredibly hard to agree how to fairly distribute the £16.75 million package of mitigation the development will deliver. The Planning Committee report explains the distribution and phasing, with the key areas being education, transport, affordable housing, health and the Parish Neighbourhood Fund. I would personally like to thank the 3 officers who have worked on the planning application at Shropshire Council for their hard work and professionalism: Ian Kilby, Gemma Lawley and Graham French. Graham has literally lived and breathed the planning and mineral applications over the last couple of years and has worked tirelessly to ensure the applications are before you today. Finally, to conclude, the redevelopment plans are in accordance with your emerging local plan. The master plan will create a balance of housing, employment and open space on a former power station site that has come to the end of its life. There has been extensive public consultation over the plans. The viability provides £16.75 million comprehensive package of mitigation. Harworth has a proven track record of delivering complex sites, and we are excited to start work on the next chapter in the life of this site. I hope you will support both applications before you this afternoon, and I also hope the Council will continue to support the site in the future so we can create a new community which we can all be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, Graham, to come back to you. Ian, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on a couple of points raised there, you can see the very strongly held views by a number of the in the community. And what I just want to raise with members, you did see a number of the issues, and we pointed them out at the site visit, that there are views, we've all got views about the world that we live in and how we experience that, particularly in matters around transport, which were very heavily referenced there by people who live and experience the community on a daily basis. Against that, though, committee, you have to consider the proposal before you today based on the technical evidence. Now, the technical evidence has taken a long period of negotiation, gestation, consideration by experts. The residents will clearly tell you how they experience and their experience of how existing junctions and the network functions. You heard Gemma Lawley's comments sort of right at the beginning as to where we anticipate the traffic flows from this development taking place and the model that's been developed to support that. So I just wanted to make one point that when you consider the evidence and what you've heard, it is the evidence that needs to sort of inform your decision. And the highways officer does not raise objections, subject to the conditions set out in your report. I think it's fair to say that viability and affordable housing are key issues. That's been raised by a number of people. And I think it was raised by Mr. White in relation to the Hinstock case. He was referring to a case where Shropshire Council is taking legal action against a developer who has failed to comply with the requirements of their legal agreement. So that is an indication that the council does take these matters very seriously, and that's where that specific case, the developer sold on the open market properties which were identified in a legal agreement as affordable. Here, you're being asked something different, though. The applicant is saying, and it's been assessed by an independent viability report, that the development cannot afford to provide, at this stage, more than 5%. Now, I say at this stage because this isn't a development that's going to take place in a year and it's all done. I said right at the beginning, it's up to 15 years of project, and there are a number of review mechanisms in the suggested sort of conditions in the legal agreement that would allow the viability to be periodically reassessed. And Graham has said, Graham French, the planning officer, has said that the first call on any additional sort of development profit would be to enhance the affordable housing contribution. So I think officers would support the concerns that have been raised, but what you have before you is a development with that 5% affordable that we can, which, having regard to the other infrastructure demands on this proposal, officers consider is acceptable in the first instance. Just looking through the points it's for members to consider, you heard Councillor Wilde talk about the timing and trigger points for some of those interventions on the highway network. You might want to consider whether the timings for those interventions are acceptable. Officers do. If you think about it, and we discussed this on site yesterday, the development doesn't all happen in one go. And so the impacts need to be assessed relevant to the development trigger points and the pressures when those, the points at which those pressures arise. I think finally, I would say this is probably an application the like of which we haven't considered in terms of its scale, breadth, complexity, and remediation sort of issues. And this is not a site where, as I've said, the application will be sort of done and dusted within 12 months. If members are minded to support this application today, there is still a process of negotiation before any decision can be issued, subject to the legal agreement being signed and completed. That's just a few of the things. Graham, I don't know if you wanted to come back on other points that you've heard from the public speakers.
Thank you, Ian. If I may, Chair, just to draw to members' attention that the additional representation sheet at page 11 includes an officer response to Councillor Wild's request for additional provisions. I think we had a 17-point request, and we have been able to accommodate quite a few of those points in terms of inclusions in the legal agreement and draft conditions. There are, however, some points where Councillor Wild is looking at earlier provision which may not align with the sort of financial and operational constraints of the scheme. We have referred to those, and there are sometimes workarounds to that, such as temporary traffic regulation orders, which Gemma Lawley has contributed in responding to this on. So whilst we may not be able to fully accept all of the proposed changes that Councillor Wild has put in, there are sort of accommodations, and substantially a lot of what she has requested has been included both in the draft legal agreement clauses, or is implicit in the legal agreement clauses on highways, and or is included within the Appendix 1 legal agreements. I think that's probably what I want to say at the moment.
Thank you. Right, we now wait for comments from the committee, and we'll start off with Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to begin with the viability assessment, because almost everything in this scheme, other than maybe its size as a whole, revolves around the viability assessment and what can be done within the constraints of that. The NPPF says that viability assessment should be published. Planning guidance, national planning guidance, says that it should be published except in exceptional circumstances. So a question I have for officers is, what are the exceptional circumstances? In this case, why haven't we seen the full viability assessment? And this is absolutely critical, and we should see it. And there's nothing exceptional about this, because this is a commercially led development. That's what we deal with every day of the week in planning. Most developments are commercially led. And so I see no exceptional circumstances, and all we have is a summary. And it is hard to accept the expertise that has gone into the summary and the checking of the summary. Nevertheless, I think it's hard for us councillors to make such a difficult decision of saying, okay, 5% housing, break our rules, create a community that is not sustainable in terms of its mix. Because what we're not doing is reflecting wider society in Shropshire, and Telford, where we are desperately in need of affordable housing. What we're doing is creating a huge settlement where it is basically unaffordable for many people who live here. And that is a really important planning policy decision. And we haven't seen the evidence for that. And I think we must see the evidence for that. Just to pick up a couple of points, and then we can go around the table as always. I am concerned about traffic, and everybody knows the roads around there. Everybody knows Much Wenlock. And putting off solutions is always like, okay, let's do it tomorrow. And then when you find you can't find a solution, and you can't work out how to get the Gaskell junction working without maybe demolishing the hotel and creating a huge roundabout, that when you get to that position, what do? You know, it's something that's absolutely critical to this scheme because of the pressure there. And outside William Brooks School as well, I think, you know, because there's going to be a lot more traffic going that way. I think it's really important. In the late submissions from the CCG, okay, it's late, but welcome to the CCG and health services. In the submission of the CCG, they say that all local GP practices are already overstretched and over capacity. So what we're saying is we're going to add 1,000 houses, 2,500 extra registrations on GP practices, which at the moment can't cope. Some have very limited ability to expand. And they, it is huge. And that's something that needs to be sorted out. Because if we learned nothing else over the last year, health is very important. We really need to have those facilities. So I am really quite unhappy with making a decision in favour of this scheme this afternoon.
Thank you. Councillor Tyndall, please.
Could I just ask Graham French, of Claire Wild's suggestions in the late reps, of which there are 11 on page 18, have any of these been absorbed into your main report yet? And if so, which ones?
Yes, I've had a series of detailed dialogue with Councillor Wild, and originally the list was around 12 items, but it grew the day before yesterday, so we've had to respond quickly to the additional ask in that, which is included on page 11, our response. But the original 12, I think, points have been included either through incorporation in the legal agreement recommended or through conditions in Appendix 1. So it's only the subsequent comments that we have specifically responded to from page 11 onwards of the late updates report. Everything else has been incorporated in an appropriate way into the 106 schedule and the conditions, Councillor.
Okay, Robert.
Well, I'm not quite sure I understood. Are you saying, Graham, that the conditions requested by Councillor Wild set out on page 18 of the late additional letters, they have or have not been incorporated into your section 106 conditions?
There were some comments that were received on Monday which post-dated the publication date of the officer reports, and obviously as such it has not been possible to include those in the report. Hence we have responded to them in the additional representations. That amounts to an additional, I think, 6 or so items, which are expressly responded to in the late representations. The original items had been included either through condition or through 106, or are implicit in conditions and 106 elements within the list on Appendix 1.
Thank you.
All right. Councillor Hignett, please.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I want to make a statement that the site visit yesterday was crucial to understanding the concerns and viability of this application. As a planning committee, we as members need to look at proposals from all the viewpoints possible to enable us to make an informed decision, and I just think officers should take note of how important it was to this application. This is one of the most complicated sites I have had to consider in my time on a planning committee. The viability of developing this site would deter most developers, certainly. Possibly 5 years until a house is sold, by which time over £30 million is likely to have been spent. 1,000 homes plus industrial units is going to have a massive impact on neighbouring highways, infrastructure, education and health facilities. And this is compounded by its unique location in the Iron Bridge Gorge. Having said that, I do support the principle of development on this site, particularly faced with the alternative of it becoming derelict. Harworth is a large PLC and certainly knew the issues affecting this site when they purchased it in 2018. They are specialists in this type of development, so I'm somewhat concerned that they're now offering 5% affordable housing as being the only viable outcome rather than 20%. Perhaps Harworth should have assessed this viability prior to purchase. I'm reasonably happy with the indicative master plan that's shown. I know we're not looking at reserve matters today, but it does include a good separation between dwellings and green spaces. I think it will push the overcapacity of health centres in the area, Broseley, Much Wenlock and Ironbridge, over their limits, and I do have concerns about that. But my main concern, as with a lot of people and some of the speakers, well, all of the speakers, is highway concerns. I've read a report in the last 2 weeks that there's going to be a massive increase in car journeys over the next 5 to 6 years. This may surprise some people, but the report I read said that as electric cars become cheaper to buy and to run, more people will take to their cars and they'll be used more. So if that report is true, we're likely to see more vehicles on the road, not less. I'm not convinced that it's true, but I just thought I would make the point. It does make you wonder about some of the highways improvements that are suggested. This is a long-term development, and I understand that some of these highways changes may be 5 or 6 years down the line. I mentioned the word line because I think the railway could be quite an important factor in this development. But those are just my thoughts at this point, Chair, and although I welcome the idea of the principle of development, I do have concerns about this particular development as it's put forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ian Kilby, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on some of the points that members have raised so far. I think that might assist the debate. Clearly, there are a number of concerns about viability, and Councillor Boddington sort of asked for the evidence for committee to consider. And I would just say this. I'm not an expert in viability. French is not an expert in viability. We've commissioned experts in viability to assess the proposals put forward by the applicant. We have not taken as read the applicant's assessments as to the viability of the proposal. I think that's an important point. That report was also jointly commissioned with Telford, which equally had concerns about the viability, and it is unusual for officers to be putting forward a proposal with a positive recommendation that is not policy compliant in that respect. However, I have said before, this is an unusual scheme, both in terms of its scale and the way it is proposed to be delivered. It has extremely high remediation costs. It has the complexity of the demolition, and of course, for those, as Councillor Hignett has just noted, who attended the site visit, that remediation costs includes another power station that's sort of under the ground that you can't see, the first power station that was built. That needs to be dealt with as part of this. So that is why in the recommendation there are those review periods, because we will be looking for every opportunity to enhance the provision of affordable housing through the life of this development. And the other thing to bear in mind is that, and this is something members can just take a view on, you have with this development a master planner that would implement some of the significant levels of infrastructure on site, such as the strategic sort of road network and the strategic landscaping. And that's often been a source of concern with some other developments that we've experienced where those key bits of infrastructure have been left unfinished or not adequately provided. My understanding of the way the Harworth model works is that it sells serviced plots, and it has an interest in doing so by providing and de-risking elements of the infrastructure by putting that in sort of up front. You might say, well, that's a matter for the developer, but I think it might be a matter also for the authority, given some of the concerns we've heard, as was mentioned about the failure of the developer in Hinstock to comply with what they've agreed to provide. I just wanted to say also about the CCG. in relation to this application. There appears to be pre-existing issues. Members are asked just to consider what are the requirements for this development in terms of meeting an appropriate level of healthcare needs. Is it appropriate for this development to deal with a pre-existing problem or issue? I would suggest not. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Councillor Parsons, please.
Thank you, Chair. It was very interesting yesterday to get a look around this particular site, a massive site with plenty of issues, but it was interesting to see just how little of that site you see from the public highway. It's quite well hidden with the tree cover right around the site. I believe, in fact, I would support the development of this site, but only in an appropriate manner. And I don't think that the proposals we have before us today are proposals that I could support. And I say that on a number of grounds. And with any development of this size, there are always going to be lots and lots and lots of issues. And therefore, there's going to be a lot of conditions attached to any planning application like this. It's a case then of whether those conditions are monitored and whether effective action is taken when conditions are broken. And sometimes, not on every occasion, do we see that is the case. I am concerned about the road situation, particularly the A road to Much Wenlock and the B4380 to Atcham and Shrewsbury. And we talked about sort of points in the development whereby we would need to have taken some action on particular road issues. But I think before we have 180 houses occupied or 250 houses occupied or whatever those points might be, we're going to have scores and scores of craftsmen, electricians, plumbers, heating engineers, decorators, carpet fitters, whatever, go into that site to do their work. And unless we take action on those two main road issues, the Gaskell Arms Junction and the B4380, unless we do that earlier than is currently being scheduled, I think we will have significant problems along the way there. The affordable housing issue is one that I am particularly concerned about. And I'm particularly concerned as well. We've talked about having reports from our technical consultees. And it's the first time, I think, in this report, of the many reports that I've seen over the last 4 years, that there is no information provided by our affordable housing department. I mean, normally when we have a development of 2 or 3 houses, we have a paragraph in there that says affordable housing doesn't apply, this is too small a proposition. But there's nothing in this report from our own affordable housing team. I wonder whether that is because they were in shock when they saw the report or what it may have been, but it's noticeable that that is not there. And I wonder whether that, with that not being there, whether we are in a position to take a decision today. It may be that this report has come to us too soon. The other point I would make is that to penalise the least affluent in our society by denying them the right to affordable housing on a scheme of this size, 150 families are likely to lose out if this application goes through. It is not those people that should be bearing the cost of the remediation of this site. They should be given the opportunity to buy or to rent properties on this site as people that we should be supporting through our own council affordable housing policy. And so for that very reason, I couldn't support this proposal today. I'd ask for it to be deferred for the applicant to take a look at these issues again. I think they're far too important just to be left. But as of today, I couldn't support this application.
Thank you. Councillor Marshall, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to say I think it's, in itself, it's a very good development, and it's been set up in quite a sympathetic manner to the local area. I do, however, have several concerns with it. Ian Kilby rightfully said that he and the officers aren't experts when it comes to the viability studies, and therefore experts were employed to do the studies. I agree with Councillor Boddington. I think it's important that we actually see those viability reports, because if we look at the affordable housing that's only being provisioned at 5%, that basically turns its back on our own policy, and I think we certainly need to be looking at that. If we look also at the clinical commissioning group statements that came in late and have been submitted to us over the last couple of days, and whilst I agree with Ian, there's existing issues there. The 4 GP practices that are in that area directly affected by the development are between 45 and 80% over capacity as we speak. The answer coming back again in the officer's comments is that the viability study says it can only have the 0.5 million, which is clearly not enough. So I actually agree. I don't think we're in a position today to accept or reject, and I actually feel we should defer, preferably with sight of the viability report.
Thank you. I'm conscious of time. We've been sat here over 2 hours now. I'm going to take a comfort break for 10 minutes because, as I say, we've been here 2.5 hours. So if anybody wants a comfort break, feel free to do one, and then we'll come back and take the proposal forward. Thank you. Yes. Is there any councillor then spoken that wants to speak first before we go? Ilri? Yeah? Ilri? Councillor Luff, please.
Hello, thank you. Oh, mask. Right, thank you. Being new to planning, it's been quite a learning curve this for me, but first thing that does concern me is affordable housing. That does, I think, is something that we would, as a committee, need to seriously consider. We do need to make allowances for the less advantaged in our area. Another thing that I'm just curious about is they are saying the school will be open after 5 or 6 years. Which school will the children be going to in the first when the houses are first built? Which schools will those children be going to, and will there be sufficient places for the children in those schools?
Okay.
If I can just respond, Chair, on that. In terms of primary provision, there have been discussions with the local education authority, and there is additional expansion capacity in the existing Buildwas Academy school. That would be brought on, including through provision of a demountable classroom, which is currently at Priorslee Academy, but which will become available fairly shortly. So at the moment, I think that there are of the order of 85 pupils at the school, majority of which derive from within Telford, in fact. And I believe that the total capacity of the school, with the demountable and with the translocation of the preschool to the village hall, would be around 130, which means that there would be sufficient internal growth capacity within the primary provision to allow for the scheme to be built out until year 5, before there becomes any additional potential pressure on education provision, at which stage the proposed new primary school will be delivered on site. With respect to secondary provision, the Shropshire Local Education Authority has confirmed that there is expansion capacity within the William Brooks School, and the additional funding that has been put forward in the later iterations of the financial plan. We now have another £500,000 towards the cost of the additional places, so we are aligned with the Telford model as well as the Shropshire model, because they differ in terms of growth capacity, but both models now agree that there is sufficient capacity for expansion within William Brooks School to accommodate the secondary pupils as well.
Okay, thank you. Another point I'd just like to ask is, what was the amount of transport when the site was open and running as a power station? How many lorries and traffic? What is going to be the difference between the traffic then and the traffic now?
Can you answer, Gemma, please?
Yeah, thank you. I think that in terms of its heyday, because the level of occupation and sort of activity at the site changed over time, but in its heyday, which would have been in the mid-90s, I suppose, and around that sort of decade, the potential, I think there were at least 250 employees at the site, and I think in terms of the level of vehicle movements, although obviously it was predominantly a rail-fed coal, so that was the principal movement, but I think that there were still nonetheless a significant number of vehicles of various sizes going in and out of the site, including the 250-odd employees more before that, I think. But also there would have been HGVs, because there would have been servicing of the heavy components and various sort of other activities to do with the infrastructure. So I recall from E.ON, who were the previous owners, there were at least 20 HGV movements a day in the heyday. So I think that we're looking at slightly more than that in the context of the construction phase. But after that, there will be no heavy vehicle movements as the residential phase becomes the principal use.
Okay, Gemma, do you want to come in there?
Sorry, I was just going to put some numbers against and add to just Graham's comments, really, that, Councillor Lufford asked about the existing use. It was, at the peak, there was around 450 people that worked at the power station, and generally it was, depending on the period, the average would be about 350, which in the morning would generate 140 movements, and then, around about 140 in the morning and afternoon peak. And there would be around 700 employee movements per day. In terms of the HGV movements, then there's around 80 HGV movements per day over an 8-hour period, and that's all outlined within the transport assessment that was submitted by the applicant.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, that's interesting.
I'm just concerned about the CCG. Where have they been to this stage? Why haven't they been talking to the developer about building a medical centre there? They sort of hung on till now, and then all of a sudden, what we can do all these people for medical advice? Why haven't they been talking to the developer and say, why can't we include a medical centre? Graham?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We have been in discussion with the CCG. There have been regular meetings over the 18 months or so that the application has been live. It's only very, very recently that CCG has actually divulged its wish list, as it were, for what it considers necessary. And I think it has put us in an awkward position because of the financial constraints that we've had. And we've obviously had to negotiate with Telford and Wrekin, and there have been various competing priorities for infrastructure. And we've had to make compromises on many elements of infrastructure. But I think that the bottom line is we still end up with some very substantial investments in infrastructure, both within the site and in the surrounding area, including these roundabouts in Telford and Wrekin and Shropshire and such like. We are continuing with our dialogue with the CCG. I think that the position that we had at the time that they came up with their 1.27 million request was that it hadn't been fully evidence-based. It was based on a generic national calculation, and when we changed the number of people in the development in total, that calculation didn't change. As Ian said, there's clearly a pre-existing issue with these practices, and I think that clearly it's incumbent on us to work with the CCG to ensure that there is an adequate solution to that, but we can't expect the developer to address pre-existing issues. It's what quantum of assistance is required and linked correctly to this scheme, which is the key. Now, we have not been able to meet the CCG's request in terms of this the amount of money that's available at the moment, but we do have this viability review clawback mechanism, which should operate on a 5-yearly basis. And whilst affordable homes would certainly be a priority, I think that there would be the option, if the CCG comes forward with an evidence-based ask, which we can subscribe to, where we are knowing exactly what the deficit in healthcare provision is with the local communities and how much that equates to a cost, then I think we could, in that case, look at the clawback mechanism as providing funding there. There are additional funding mechanisms. Obviously, there's funding within the NHS. There is asset value to the properties that the CCG have, but there are additional, there is further development that's scheduled for the local area, either allocated or sort of committed. And so there are other mechanisms by which any deficit from the CCG could be addressed relative to what they're asking for. But I think we need to recognise that it's going to be some time before the effects of new houses from this property, from this scheme, over a 13 or so year build-out period, starts to sort of materially impact on the private practice healthcare services in their own right. And as Ian said, there's a pre-existing issue that the healthcare have identified. Is it right and reasonable to expect the applicant to address that pre-existing issue? We will continue to engage proactively with the CCG, and we have a new meeting scheduled for the near future, so we will discuss this with them.
Thank you. Councillor Turnmellan, please.
Yeah, excuse me. I apologise for the quality of my voice. In fact, I think I'm going to have to. I think I'm going to have to stop.
Okay.
Sorry, David. I was just going to say, actually, I think I think we all feel hamstrung by the timescale of this development. Incredibly so, but I'm not particularly concerned with the viability issues because of the clawback. I think we've laid the ghost of Brugginton Hall by now. And I think that certainly as far as the viability goes, I can understand it over that timescale, that 13-year timescale. The other issue is that I was concerned. I raised the issue yesterday. I'm getting my voice back a bit now. I raised the issue yesterday about the Gaskell Arms, and I expressed my concerns then again about the timescale, the fact that we were considering the Gaskell Arms at the end of the development, or as the development progressed. We weren't addressing known issues, and even if Shropshire Council and its highways officers don't appreciate the problems, there are thousands of people who actually live in Wenlock and use the Gaskell Arms junction who can testify to the problems that exist there. And they need looking at now. If you put this development down, the situation is just going to get, I mean, I cannot express my, I was going to say anger, but it's in fact frustration that no one else can see. But I suppose it's because as a regular user of the Gaskell Arms junction, I can appreciate the problems. And I really and truly do not see how the heck anybody can find a solution to it if you're going to stick 1,000 houses on a development at the other end of Shinton Street. I'd better stop there because I'm about to pack it all together. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Tyndall and Councillor Boddington, please. Councillor Tyndall.
I'm not sure everybody's spoken, but I detect a feeling that we should defer this application for consideration of 3, if not 4 things. The first one of all is the affordable housing. And the provision of an amount of affordable housing, I think, is even more important than sports pitches, railway links, leisure uses, and a park and ride facility. I think, if I don't mind me, I hope you don't mind me plagiarising what other councils have said, but we ought to be serving the less well-off and the least able to afford open market housing better than this scheme currently provides. I understand about the clawback. I wonder whether 5 years is a little bit too long in the cycle of events, but that really isn't for me to try and calculate. So affordable housing is the first one, reason for development. The second one, and I agree with David Tremellon on this and others, that the Gaskell Arms junction, and if I could use your analogy of pre-existing problems with medical practices, there is a pre-existing problem. And again, I think if I was the developer, I wouldn't be that keen on trying to put money into curing the existing problem. By all means, put money into an improvement at that junction as a consequence of building this development. But it's a shambles, that Gaskell Arms junction, at the moment. The third one is the CCG. To build 1,000 homes with, 2,500, 3,000 people, is a lot of people requiring medical attention. And I have on the opinion that the CCG should be more heavily engaged in this exercise than they have been hitherto. So I'm going to propose a deferral on those 3 grounds. No doubt the planning officers can help me put them into Plannee's speak, but maybe I will have a seconder. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you. Can I second that? And indeed, can I just give a script which says almost exactly what Robert has just said, but in slightly fewer words. So this is what Robert has proposed, and I am seconding. The committee recognises the proposed high level of design, environmental protection and the significant addition to Shropshire's housing supply. However, the committee is not confident that the development constitutes sustainable development. We wish to defer a decision to allow further clarification of viability, including clawback, the level of affordable housing, transport issues, especially in and around Much Wenlock, including the Gaskell Arms Junction, the capacity of primary care facilities.
Okay. You're happy with that? Yeah. Right. Anybody else wish to make a comment?
I am happy with the second
Ian.
suggestion.
Yep.
If I may, Chair and Committee, just to assist the officers with this, if members are minded to support this recommendation as Councillor Boddington set out with those reasons, it would certainly assist the officers to understand before we report back to you what it is you expect us to demonstrate. So in terms of viability, is it understanding the working out that's led to the conclusion? Because if the conclusion is the same, and this is the point I was making earlier by saying I'm not an expert, but we've employed an expert who sort of agrees with it, what is committee going to do if they don't like if it just leads you to the same conclusion? And I don't wish to be provocative, it's just that it assists us with the applicant. What is it that you're asking us to do? Sorry.
Councillor Boddington.
I think what we're asking is for us to have confidence in that viability assessment. You did not directly answer my point earlier in the meeting about the fact that planning guidance and the framework say that these assessments should be published, except in very exceptional circumstances, and I don't believe we have one. We need to look at that and gain confidence. If then we're perfectly as content as we could be, let's put it that way, then clearly we've gained that confidence and we can make a vote. At the moment we are not confident, and I certainly could not make a vote without seeing that. And that, of course, impacts the level of affordable housing. I mean, this is clearly the biggest issue along with transport and on that. And I think we're pleading again for another look at transport issues and the timing and the phasing of those. There's rather a feeling that solutions are coming on after the problems have occurred, and the road network in this area already has a lot of problems. Sorry, I can't remember which councillor earlier, but mentioned the fact there's going to be all the construction traffic, the fitters, and the traffic for people moving in, and the inevitable couriers. And Graham covered the issue about capacity of primary care facilities. We're certainly not suggesting that the developers should pay catch-up, for the fact they're overstretched at the moment. That's a CCG problem, and that must be dealt with. However, I think we need to see a bit more in terms of projection about, if there's a level playing field now and they actually had enough capacity, when do they run out of capacity? What sort of planning do we need? Now, whether that's paid for through development contributions or through CCG funding, that's something we don't know yet because we don't really have a scope on it. We've only seen this information today, last 24 hours from the CCG. So that's the sort of clarity we're looking for, Ian.
If I may just, Chair, just on that final point, I mean, there is an opportunity to use funds from the Community Infrastructure Levy to support development in a wider area, to include things like medical facilities. As we said right at the beginning, this is an opportunity site. It wasn't sort of in the local plan. It will be in the review of the local plan. But there is the opportunity, members, to allocate funds from the Community Infrastructure Levy received in the place plan area to support the facility, the delivery of a facility on this site. It's just for your consideration. I think I'm clear on the sort of viability point. You want to, and yes, forgive me for not answering that explicitly. You're correct. Viability assessments in the planning practice guidance should be made available, and generic any data that is not commercially sensitive redacted. But effectively, I think what members are asking for is to understand the working out, how you arrived at that, and the assumptions therein, and that was raised by one of the public speakers. And then the traffic point, I do accept Councillor Tremellen and it was Councillor Parsons' point, 2 different points. Sorry, the existing network has its issues, but we have to look, committee, at what the impact of this development is on those, rather than solving pre-existing problems. That would be nice if it was offered. The traffic management for construction traffic, I think, is a relevant point. And Councillor Parsons has experience of a site that's sort of a large development site within a established residential area. This is slightly different, but I think what members are looking for is the assurance that the construction management can be accommodated without adversely affecting existing communities. And there would be conditions ordinarily to support that, but I think you're asking for a bit more clarity on that point. Would that be correct?
Thank you. Councillor Lumby, please.
When I first read the report, I must admit I highlighted the 5%, and I wasn't particularly impressed with the engaged every 5 years because it just seemed so far down. I just wonder whether we're going to kick the can down the road in relation to affordable housing, which I support, and that there is another way we could do it, which perhaps front-loaded the housing, because at the moment it's over 15 years for 50 houses, so the developers could effectively build all them right at the end. So if we could get them at the beginning, which isn't what a developer want because they're building stuff they can't make money on, then we can then relax a little bit as to whether we get clawback. Just a comment on the road, one of the speakers said that they'd done a survey of the people that live in that area, and that 98% of them chose the B road, which isn't going the Gaskell Arms way. So whilst I've heard an awful lot about Gaskell Arms, which is a problem, I holiday that way with my caravan, I know the issues there, is that until it's really down in the project, it doesn't add to it significantly. So I just wonder whether everybody's just so happy to kick the can down the road a little bit.
Thank you. Ian, do you want to come back there?
I think Councillor Lumby's raised an interesting point there about the early delivery of affordable housing and whether members want to consider that, because we've got a sort of threshold at the moment. I'm not wishing to go back on go against the recommendation that members are formulating, but I think what Councillor Lumby is highlighting is another way of doing this. I seek from the developer the ability to forward fund or deliver more affordables in the early phase when they sort of get going, and then sort of revisit this sort of development appraisal as they go through, because once they've started, at the moment, they are incurring significant costs. You'll have seen, those of you who are on site, with nothing really to sort of show for it. I appreciate that's their risk, but this is a major strategic site. Actually, getting that, if we can address the concerns of committee and get development going, and perhaps it's for committee to consider whether you would wish them to bring forward the affordables in an earlier phase, then it allows, it could be then a commitment from the developer to address some of the concerns that members have got. In other words, it might bridge the gap if they bring the affordables forward sooner, which is what members are saying is very important. It only becomes, if they over-provide in the short term, it gives them a bit of wriggle room against what they're building, I'm saying.
Okay.
And I haven't discussed this, obviously, with the developer. I'm just picking up on what Councillor Lumby said.
Do you want to come in first? Can I ask Miranda to come in there, please?
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to the affordable housing, I could give some reassurance to the councillor who raised it. The usual 106 provisions we have for affordable housing don't allow developers to push it back to the very last phase. It has to come throughout the phases. So there wouldn't be the normal precedents for our legal agreements wouldn't allow it to come at the end anyway. Obviously, if it was felt appropriate for it to come forward earlier, as Ian Kilby has just mentioned, then the legal agreement could be adjusted accordingly in terms of the obligations for the timing of that. If I can just, Chair, I would also just mention with regards to the timings in terms of works to ameliorate traffic impacts, it is really important to remember that we would be requiring these things either by 106 agreement or through condition, and there are tests for those. So they do have to be necessary to make the development acceptable. So we can't bring things forward in advance of when the impacts would be being felt. So you are having to look at when those impacts are actually hitting those junctions, as the last councillor who spoke just mentioned. So while it might be nice to start work on something that's already an existing problem, we can't require those things of this development in advance. And highways, I would also urge members to bear in mind, is a technical matter, and it is informed by the technical evidence, which is what we have to base the requirements that we place on this development. So I think that's just to sort of at least just advise members how to look at this in terms of how you're approaching it.
Okay. Councillor Parsons and Councillor Tyndall.
I just want to pick up a point that was raised a little earlier about the B4380, the road which goes through Buildwas and Leighton, because I don't think it is just about the Gaskell Arms junction. I think it is about that road as well, because as the Gaskell Arms junction deters traffic, more traffic will use the B road. And I drive that road when I'm going from Shrewsbury to Ironbridge, and I drove it last night. And as I was going back, there was a number 19 bus heading towards Buildwas with a string of traffic behind it, and very few overtaking spots along that road. And so the busier that road gets, the more likely there could be some sort of incident or an accident. So I'm just trying to make sure that that is taken into consideration.
Okay, Councillor Tyndall, please.
I'm a bit concerned about this suggestion that the affordable housing is brought forward early. I got two concerns. Will that actually deliver an absolute increase in the number of affordables? And it's not for me, obviously, it's for the developer to say, well, hang on a minute, I've got to make the money out of selling the open market ones in order to make the affordable homes. So I'm not sure that we're helped in that way. I, along with, I think, Andy Boddington, feel that we should see more of the arithmetic that went into the viability, and so we can actually, obviously, anything that's commercially sensitive, but 5% is a heck of a lot different from 20%. So that's the most urgent thing, I think.
Ian, please.
Sorry, I've got a few mask issues. I was just wondering, sorry, Councillor Boddington, I'm just wondering, the first phase is around 250 homes, and that would be sited on the sort of eastern, it's currently proposed that that's on the eastern boundary of the site. This hasn't been put to the applicant, but if that first phase was policy compliant by 20%, the 50 homes could be in that first phase. Throughout the, by the time that is built out, we'll be getting pretty close to a review period anyway. Now I realise I'm not negotiating, I'm putting a suggestion to committee that if it's policy compliant in the first phase, and this hasn't been discussed with the applicant, would that change your views on the matter?
Councillor Boddington, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ian. I think at the moment what we're discussing is what we're asking officers to come back with in a report. So I think our recommendation is asking officers to come back as soon as possible with a report that covers those issues. And if that's feasible and can be negotiated with the developer, which is clearly not something we can do now, or any suggestion around that? Because around the table, I haven't heard anybody say, oh, let's throw this out completely. You know, what we're looking at here is finding ways of making it work, of being satisfied that in improving the biggest development we're probably ever going to see before a planning committee, certainly this one, that in improving it, we're absolutely certain we're on certain ground, we understand what we're doing, and we have confidence in our decision.
I think responding to Ian's suggestion of doing a policy compliant of the first 250, that will produce 50 houses, affordable dwellings, and the developer may since then decide, well, I'm not building any more.
Councillor Marshall, please.
I think Councillor Tyndall's really summed up what I was about to say then. Whilst I appreciate Ian's trying to look at different ways to get going, and I understand it's important to get going, to be policy compliant for the first phase doesn't offer any guarantees. And I think from what I'm hearing around the committee at the moment is we're all concerned about the low number of 5% overall. And I know I am personally, it goes against our policies, and I'm sitting here looking at ways not to reject it, not to necessarily accept it either, till a lot of things have been looked at, but I'm certainly looking at increasing the number of affordable housing over the lifespan of the project.
Thank you. Graham.
Yeah, if I can just say that the 250 first phase is the provision of policy compliant 50 affordable homes would nearly take us to the point of the 5-year review at which the clawback mechanism would engage and there would be a prioritisation towards additional affordable housing. Obviously the situation could change, the funding context, the profitability, but I don't think that it's likely to reduce the profitability of the site over time. But I think it would at least give members a little bit of confidence that the initial phase is policy compliant and that there is a viable review mechanism by which further affordable housing could subsequently be delivered. Obviously, we would need to discuss this with the applicant. We haven't, and there are obviously costs involved in the earlier provision of affordable homes. What I would say additionally is that the sustainable design brief, which will underpin this application, it would be expected within that there is a socially balanced mix of open market housing provided as well. And I think that how that aligns to the markets could well provide some further mitigation for members if there are, for instance, more intermediate homes which are high in demand and short in supply in the local vicinity, as indeed they tend to be at the moment in Shropshire generally.
Councillor Marshall, please.
Whilst I appreciate what you're saying with that, Graham, I honestly believe if we look at the clawback, would be getting close at the end of the 5 years. Just looking at the financials in themselves, and obviously I'm not in a position at the moment to drill down the numbers, that first 5-year plan, if we're delivering 15% more affordable housing in those first 5 years, that would reduce the profitability of the site, which could then effectively have an impact on the future clawback parts of the scheme. So as I say, something, whilst I understand what you're saying, and I haven't got the numbers in front of me to drill them down properly in a forensic way, I do think that overall I'm looking, for my part, to increase the number of viable houses, of affordable houses, sorry.
Right. Should we come back in, Mand?
It's a very good point that it would affect the future viability potentially. However, there are other mechanisms which could potentially engage, and whilst members can't place any weight whatsoever on it at the moment, the company is well versed in negotiation with Homes England and has indicated in the application there has been dialogue, productive dialogue at Homes England. If there are situations where there is a viability issue that is demonstrated through means of a planning decision, it's ratified, if members accept ultimately the viability conclusions that our independent consultants have ratified themselves, then that would provide a firm basis for Harworth to go forward with a bid for additional affordable homes to Homes England. we can't take any sort of place any weight on that at the moment, but it is nonetheless a material factor in the context. So what members could do is, in making any recommendation, is to encourage the applicants to proactively engage with Homes England to report back to them at perhaps the time of the first viability review, or if not before.
Miranda.
Thank you, Chair. I think just in terms of the way that we've been approaching affordable housing and talking about a policy compliant amount, it is important just to actually look at the words of our own policy, which is CS11, and it does require new open market housing to make appropriate contributions to the provision of local needs affordable housing. But that does have regard to the viability of developments, taking into account our policies in respect of infrastructure contributions. And so if the viability assessment that, as you've heard, has been assessed by independent assessors, and I think, there is a sense here that none of us here are probably viability experts, and so at the end of the day, that evidence is going to be the evidence that you have, then if it is in accordance with that viability assessment, ultimately it isn't in breach of our policy requirement because the policy allows a reduction based on viability.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons.
On that very subject, the new local plan, which is in draft form and which is going through consultation at the present time, is very clear on page 84 in DP3, affordable housing provision. It says in section 2, the provision of reduced rates of affordable housing due to viability concerns on otherwise sustainable schemes will be considered in exceptional circumstances where evidence is clearly presented and agreed by the council. And I don't think we've seen much of any of that.
Right. Ian. Graham.
It's a moot point. I'm not going to try and press members on it. It was just that Councillor Parsons is referring to the emerging plan, but there is a mechanism, as Miranda's mentioned, in relation to the current plan, for you to consider viability subject to some evidence. We're saying there is some evidence. Members are saying they'd like to see it and understand it. And again, I didn't wish to be provocative. It was just that, what are we going to do if it just sort of if you just agree with its conclusions? It was simply. I mean, it's back to that working out point.
Councillor Boddington.
I think if we agree with its conclusions, then we'll make a proper vote on the application. It is about having confidence to make a vote on a development of this importance.
Councillor Tindall.
Yes, Andy Boddington said exactly what I was going to say. I mean, I would be content if it's proven beyond doubt that 5% is all that can be arranged. At the moment, I don't have that insight.
Right.
So if I may, Chair, if we can get this information from the applicant and make that available to members, set that out in a report back to members, that's what you're looking for, is that clear?
Right, we have a proposal on the table for deferment, seconded by Councillor Tindall.
No, other way around, but not on that.
Right, proposed by Councillor Tindall, seconded by Councillor Boddington for a deferment on the application. All those in favour of deferment, please. One, two, three, four. Yeah. No, I was going to abstain. Against? One abstention. Okay, so that's carried now as a deferment. Okay, thank you. So do we want the second part of the agenda now?
Thank you, Chair. In light of the members' decision, it will not be possible to actually make a definitive recommendation on this application, given the fact that it is interrelated and interdependent on the current application. However, I will be inviting members to make a recommendation if they are minded to approve this application, subject to the outline application being subsequently approved, because there is a legal agreement commitment from the applicant that the minerals element will not be implemented other than in the context of approval of the outline scheme. So my presentation is on that basis. So if we can have the next slide, please. Okay, so we'll see from that the mineral site is nestled within the broader blue line of the outline planning application. I've got to get my east and west right, but it's on the western side of the site. It's the greenfield area. Members stood there yesterday where the proposed roundabout was, and they looked towards that area and they saw that there's a sloping field there which would not be impacted upon. There was a lot of trees, so you wouldn't actually see it from that location. But the proposal is to extract 1.9 million tonnes approximately of sand and gravel from land within and to the immediate west of the former power station sites. This would be worked and restored in a phased manner over a period of 5 years. In fact, the restoration would take another year or so following on from the mineral working. But obviously it would be a restoration to an interim landform. Could I borrow your... Oh, right, sorry, right. Just for some reason it stopped. The principal justification there is to allow recovery of sand in advance of the development, which underlies the western part of the site. And this will avoid the sterilisation of this mineral resource, which is located within a mineral safeguarding area. Now, that's a kind of a designation which identifies the presence of a potentially economic mineral resource, but without necessarily implying any presumption in favour of its working. Could I have the next slide, please? So this just shows the block phasing within the site, and you can see that there's proposal to work it in a kind of orderly and progressive manner. Where at any one time, only a smallish proportion of the total area would be disturbed by the mineral extraction. There would only be a dry screening plant within the site, not a full kind of quarry plant site. Other land will either have been restored or it will be working or it will not have been disturbed within that 5-year period, and it rolls progressively in a sort of broadly east-west direction, I think. The second justification is that this will allow the formation of an engineered development platform suitable for accommodating the residential development. At the moment, there's a sort of little knoll within the site which extends down from the edge of Tickwood Hill, and if you were to put housing directly on that, then it would all be potentially visible. And obviously we've got the AONB and we've got the setting of Buildwas Abbey, so lowering the levels on average by 10 metres would also improve screening of the proposed residential in this part of the site. The applicant, as I mentioned before, has confirmed that mineral extraction would not proceed unless the redevelopment scheme also proceeds. So access to the site is by means of a private road which runs along the northern boundary of the Buildwas Quarry off the Much Wenlock Road. It's just to the north of where we were stopped yesterday, about 200 metres or so to the north of that, to the north of Mill Farm. 25% of the mineral would go out by road. 75%, or at least up to 25%, 75% of it, which would amount to 300,000 tonnes or just under per year, is proposed to go out by rail. And I think this is a positive in some respects because it takes the additional off the road while still allowing the mineral not to be sterilised and facilitating the development platform. And additionally, it provides a purpose for the currently dormant rail use within the site, which keeps it ticking over until such time as hopefully the company can establish its light rail service, which offers huge potential for sustainable transport. That's related to the previous application. So objections have been received from local parish councils, mainly on highway grounds, with some concerns about flooding also. There are no remaining objections from technical consultees, a number of whom have asked for planning conditions to be imposed, which are included in Appendix 1. The applicant's willing to accept a legal agreement including a routing restriction to direct quarry vehicles up the Iron Bridge bypass and away from Much Wenlock and Buildwas, which we've heard are obviously sensitive areas. And this would be monitored by CCTV cameras installed at the proposed site access. Highway authorities not objected, subject to condition detailing specification for improvements to proposed access onto the Much Wenlock Road. Now, there is a substantive improvement proposed to that T-junction after the mineral extraction, when the housing development can begin to be constructed in that sort of general area, and the infrastructure. Before the mineral is removed, you can't build the access routes over that site and the other infrastructure, but from about year 6 onwards, there will be a substantive improvement, but there is an interim improvement prior to that, which will assist in accommodating the flow of traffic from that T-junction, which from year 2 onwards will also start to accommodate traffic from the build-outs occurring in the eastern part of the site from the new emerging residential development. So the Environment Agency requested additional information on hydrology, which has subsequently been provided, and they have not objected in their most recent comments, subject to water monitoring and management conditions. Control on water discharge will be exercised under the agency's environmental permitting regime. Hydrology report advises the proposed mineral extraction would take place dry and that a significant thickness of unsaturated permeable strata would remain beneath the proposed extraction base. As such, therefore, the proposal should not lead to any material reduction in any natural soak-away effect. This is evidenced by the company's boreholes, which go down to some considerable depth beneath the application site, I think to around about 30 metres AOD, as opposed to the extraction base of around 50 or 45 metres AOD. Whilst the proposals would involve loss of best and most versatile agricultural land, which is protected by the NPPF, this would not occur unless the outline development also proceeds. And additionally, the soil resource within the site would be reused beneficially within the wider master plan application site, where there is a dearth of good quality soils, and it would actually help in if there is any residual low level contamination, then it can be covered, removed off site. Certainly the availability of good clean soils will greatly assist in the restoration and landscaping of the site in general. It's considered that whilst the loss of best and most versatile is sort of generally not encouraged to the MPPF, in this particular case, because of the linkage to this major strategic site, which is being promoted in the emerging Shropshire local plan, that there is a kind of wider public benefit from the development which would justify the loss of agricultural land in this case. At the site visit yesterday, members saw the high degree of natural screening surrounding the site. Council's landscape consultants accepted the conclusion of the applicant's visual appraisal that any effects on the setting of the AONB would be very limited. Phased nature and design of the development and associated landscaping proposals also mean that any visual effects would be minimised. Historic environment teams not objected, having regard to the general lack of intervisibility between the site and Buildwas IB, which members observed yesterday. It's not considered the mineral proposals would in themselves result in less than substantial harm to the setting of the ancient monument in the terms meant by NPPF paragraph 196. Obviously, we consider that issue more detail in the context of the outline application. So the applicant's ecology surveys confirm that no species or designations would experience unacceptable effects after mitigation has been provided. We note that there's a lot more detail in the outline application regarding ecological mitigation issues. And the ecology team has not objected subject to conditions, and it considered the test in NPPF paragraph 175 with respect to wildlife designations can be met. So in conclusion, the proposals are linked to the outline application to redevelop the power station site, and as such they derive support from the NPPF policies advocating housing provision and redevelopment of brownfield sites. Additionally, there's general support for mineral proposals in the NPPF due in particular to economic benefits which such development can bring. Further, you've got the avoidance of sterilisation and the improved screening that this would facilitate. So it's concluded on balance, Chair, the proposals are sustainable and could be accepted in relation to relevant development plan policies, national guidance and other material planning considerations. There's subject to recommended conditions and legal agreement. There's just one errata to draw your attention to. On page 111 of the list of consultee comments, there is a reference to an Appendix 2. This doesn't exist. It was an earlier iteration of the officer report. Consultee comments are summarised in section 4 of the report and are available to view online via the link in section 10 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Graham. We got 4 speakers on this one. We start off with Councillor Lorraine Pratt, please, representing Buildwas Parish Council. And you have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you again for letting me speak. The Parish Council, as I said before, rejects this application due to the negative impact on the local area, and it forms a preparation work for the large development, to which we also reject. The residents who live close in proximity to the site are already adversely affected by the noise from the existing non-operational quarry and unsociable hours. Residents are concerned about dust, air quality and noise pollution, and that the level deemed acceptable in the application may not be acceptable for those living nearby. The proposed work will remove some of the best soakaway materials in the valley to be replaced with hard surfaces as the proposed development progresses, which will inevitably lead to an increased runoff of water into the river. We have seriously concerns over the potential impact of this on the site of Buildwas and on Ironbridge. The B4380 and A4169 are not suitable for the use of HGVs from the quarry site. The already poor conditions of the B4380 would be made worse by an increased use of HGVs. There are limited safe opportunities for overtaking of slow-moving vehicles on both roads. Should the application be approved, the Parish Council requests the following conditions and mitigations be to address the concerns of the local community. We note that some of these are partially covered in the officer's report. The hours of work for the quarry site should be set at 7:30 to 5:30 on weekdays and 8 to 1 on Saturday, with no Sunday or bank holiday working. This would help to ease congestion at peak times and would limit the negative impact on the neighbourhood residents. HGVs must not be allowed to wait on the road at the entrance to the site within or outside of these hours to protect amenity and air quality for local residents. A legal agreement should be put in place to ensure that vehicles to and from the quarry site do not use the B4380 and the A4169. This should be accompanied by the appropriate measures, recognisable number plates, cameras on junctions to enable enforcement of the routing conditions. Shropshire Council must ensure the full implementation of the visual screening and bunding proposed in the application to limit the negative impact on local residents. The area surrounding the entrance to the site has been very untidy since the site has been taken over, and this should also be visibly screened for the amenity of residents. Shropshire Council must ensure that the negative impact of the work in terms of noise, dust and air quality is minimised and monitored. Should there be any delays in reinstating the Albert Edward Bridge, there must be no increase in the maximum road vehicle movements included in the planning application to compensate for the loss of transport via the rail network, as the road network surrounding the site is not able to accommodate such an increase in HGV movements. The 14 miles per hour speed limit currently on the B4380 exiting Builders Village should be extended to the junction at the bottom of the Builders Bank and up onto the A4169 to the start of the 50 miles per hour sign to improve the safety of all road users within the increase of traffic on the surrounding road network.
Thank you.
Should the outline application for the site be approved, the proposal changes to the road junctions and the outline planning application for the power station site should be made prior to the work at the quarry beginning to improve traffic flow. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have Councillor Sue Jones, please, representing Leighton Parish Council.
Thank you.
You have 3 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for letting me speak again. The Parish Council has many concerns with this application due to the possible increase in HGV movements along the B4380 and in particular the effect such vehicles could have on the villages of Leighton and Buildwas. The B4380 is a rural road. It has many side roads and properties exiting onto it. It is winding and narrow, making it particularly dangerous. The road is also a national cycle route and as such has vulnerable road users. An increase in HGV traffic on this road would inevitably cause more safety issues. The quality of life for residents living in the villages along the B4380 could be adversely affected by increased noise, dust, emissions and vibration damage. We are pleased to see a legal agreement that has been added that does not allow HGV traffic from the development site to use the B4380. However, we are concerned with the compliance of this condition. We are already experiencing problems with HGV traffic from other quarries coming through Leighton and Buildwas villages at high speed as early as 6 a.m. This is not acceptable. We're informed that CCTV will be used to monitor the HGV movements onto the Much Wenlock Road from the development site. However, there is no monitoring at the Buildwas junction to make sure traffic turns up Buildwas Bank and not onto the B4380, which is the quickest and shortest route to Shrewsbury. Sat-navs may automatically take HGV traffic on this shortest route. We suggest CCTV is also sited at the Buildwas junction to aid compliance. We would like assurances that if the Buildwas Bank route is blocked or the rail link is out of action, the sand and gravel will remain on site until these routes are cleared. We ask that specialist VAS signs are placed along the B4380 at the commencement of any work at the development site to measure, record accurately the numbers, speeds and types of vehicles travelling along this route. We will then have real, accurate measurement of traffic data. This data will help inform about what type of mitigations may be necessary and whether HGV vehicles are sticking to the planning conditions. We would welcome a highways liaison group to be set up to include parish councils, Shropshire Council officers and representatives from Harworth to monitor this traffic data and traffic effects until the completion of the development. Finally, we ask that the traffic calming measures due to be installed in Leighton, Buildwas and Atcham are implemented urgently for safety reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. We now call on Claire Wilde, please, a local member. And you have 5 minutes to address the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Committee, for allowing me the opportunity to address you again today. This is a 44-hectare site. Sand and gravel will only be extracted from 22 hectares in order to provide a development platform for housing, as you've already heard. This green field is a mineral-safe quarry area to be protected from sterilisation by other forms of development. That's in Policy MD16. This means that development of housing cannot take place before the minerals, sand and gravel, are extracted. However, the 1.9 million tonnes due to be extracted under this application is only a proportion of the minerals available. Therefore, it is correct to say that this application does not comply with Policy MD16 or CS16. The land within this application is really as described on page 7, paragraph 6.5, a development platform. Only the amount of sand and gravel needed to provide a development platform is going to be extracted. I refer you to page 19, paragraph 6.52, in advance of proposed residential development without which the quarry will not proceed. The site is within 10 metres of the AONOB, and the working area is 130 metres from the AONOB, and very close to the Buildwas Abbey, which is a scheduled ancient monument with very specific planning protection. To overcome these planning issues and screen the proposed development, the solution proposed is to reduce the height of the north-facing land by 10 metres so that the proposed housing development cannot be seen from the Abbey. Therefore, once enough sand and gravel has been extracted from the site to create the development platform, the minerals within the ground will be effectively sterilised. How does that sit with the fact that this is a minerals safe area site? How are policies CS16 and MD16 overcome? I have requested a series of conditions which I hope committee members will accept. Unlike the main application, these suggested conditions must be put in place prior to any mineral export from the site. Those of you who visited the site will be aware of the speed of the traffic on the A4169. The speed limit has to be reduced to 40 miles an hour on both the A1469 and the B4380. The installation of vehicle-activated signs that record speed, volume of traffic and type of vehicles will not only help to reduce speed, but provide valuable and reliable data to monitor speed and traffic. The 25% of sand and gravel supplied to the local market by road must be strictly conditioned with a routing agreement. 75% of the sand and gravel will leave via the Albert Rail Bridge. If the repairs to the bridge are delayed, it is critical that no extra lorry movements are allowed. The conditions I've asked for, apart from working hours, where I've asked for a 7:30 start instead of 7, and 8 a.m. to 12 o'clock on a Saturday, and condition 9:11, I would really appreciate if you looked at those and agreed them. This is a very finely balanced application. As Mr. French has just said, you have significant traffic speed and volume issues. There are 5 junctions within 50 metres at the bottom of Buildwas Bank. A junction that will not work in its current form, and a roundabout is proposed. Every day lorries struggle to slow down coming down the bank. There is a recognised cumulative traffic impact, hence the proposal that 75% of the sand and gravel leaves by rail. Sorry, I've lost my place here. So, the most important question is, how much weight do you attach to MD16 and CS16 in our local plan for an application on a mineral-safe quarry area that only extracts a percentage of the protected mineral site in order to create a development platform? I fully support the other objections raised by the local parish councils. We have together put forward a comprehensive argument against this application as time has allowed today. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Anybody got any questions for Claire, please? No. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
And now go on Craig Ball, please, the agent. And you have 3 minutes to address the committee, so thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair, to speak. My name is Craig Ball. I'm the planning agent for the mineral application representing the Harworth Group. Firstly, we must commend the planning officer's report. It is thorough, properly balanced, and reflects the careful and detailed consideration of the application that has taken place. As has been said, the minerals application has been closely linked to the master plan development, and Harworth have committed to a legally binding agreement not to go forward with the minerals application unless the master plan development is permitted and implemented. 2 main justifications for the minerals development are the requirement to satisfy the mineral safeguarding policy, which would avoid the sterilisation of proven mineral resources, and to create a stable development platform which is visually acceptable. The application would avoid the sterilisation of sand and gravel by allowing its recovery in advance of the housing development. This is in accordance with policy MD16. Furthermore, the recovery of the sand and gravel would enable the creation of a stable development platform which would sit down in the landscape, reducing the impact of the development proposed in the master plan with improved screening from the surrounding area. The extraction has been planned in a phased manner to minimise disturbance of operations. The potential environmental and amenity effects of the proposals have been considered, and there are no objections from technical consultees which would suggest that the proposal should not proceed. We consider that the impacts of the operations will be satisfactorily controlled by the imposition of a comprehensive set of planning conditions, including requirements for both a noise and dust action plan. These conditions include a restriction that 75% of the mineral extracted will be transported off-site by rail. Only a maximum of 100,000 tonnes per annum will leave the site by road. The applicant is happy to agree a legally binding traffic routing agreement with a 3-strike and you're out covenant for any HGV driver who consistently breaches the routing agreement. Even though mineral operations are temporary in nature, the National Planning Policy Framework, Para 205, advises when determining planning applications, great weight should be given to the benefits of mineral extraction, including the economy. Direct and indirect employment will be generated by the proposals, plus goods and services required by this type of development, which will provide benefits to the local economy. Clearly, we support the recommendation and respectfully ask the committee to grant planning permission subject to appropriate conditions. In doing so, we can confirm the company's commitment to continue to liaise and work with both the council and the local community to properly control the operation of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Right, committee, who wants to kick this one off? Oh, Graham.
Sorry, Chair, just to butt in front of the members, but can I just make some clarification on the point regarding mineral safeguarding that Councillor Wilde mentioned? The policy MD16 in the SAMDEV plan indicates that it's part 3 of that application for permission for non-mineral development in an MSA mineral safeguarding area must include an assessment of the effects of the proposed development on the mineral resource beneath or adjacent to the site of the development of a protected mineral handling facility. Well, it's not relevant in this case. This assessment will provide information to accompany the planning application to demonstrate the satisfaction of the Mineral Planning Authority, that's us, that the mineral interests have been adequately considered and known mineral resources will be prevented where possible, Chair, from being sterilised or unduly restricted by other forms of development occurring on or close to the resource. The planning authority in this case is the Mineral Planning Authority, has significant experience in dealing with quarry applications across Shropshire, which is a major player in the West Midlands in terms of mineral production. Detailed information has been provided by the applicant regarding the nature of the mineral resource. We have 20 boreholes within the site which have proven the sand and gravel extends to beneath the depths of the proposed extraction. However, to recover the lower mineral in the site, some of which is variable in quality, would also have the effect of lowering the development platform so it becomes nearer to the groundwater table. Now, one of the competing priorities within this is to preserve the natural soak-away effect that Councillor Pratt mentioned, I believe, in her presentation. And by ensuring that there is a generous freeboard of unsaturated sand beneath the site, there is reassurance that that natural soak-away effect will continue to apply. In this case, we're satisfied that the appropriate amount of mineral is being recovered, but we have to look at this in the context of the bigger picture, which is the master plan development. And policy MD16 does not say that all mineral in a mineral safeguarding area will be recovered at all costs. It's a qualified evaluation, and it has to take account of what may come afterwards following the mineral extraction. In this case, the council asked Mineral Planning Authority, the Mineral Planning Authority is happy that the balance is correct, that the amount of mineral being recovered is correct, and that the amount of mineral being left in situ is correct, given the other considerations I've mentioned, that this therefore poses no conflict with policy MD16. If I can just mention it also in terms of the enforceability of the traffic routing agreement, which would avoid vehicles being channelled through towards Much Wenlock or on the Buildwas Road. Yes, there is a CCTV camera that would be installed at the T-junction site access onto the Wenlock Road. It isn't supported that we would require the company to put an additional set of CCTV, I'll say that again, cameras on the bottom of Buildwas Bank outside the site. The width of the vision of the CCTV cameras at the Buildwas, at the junction onto the Wenlock Road could be easily arranged such that it encompasses views towards the junction and makes sure things don't turn left down the Buildwas Road. But we also have additional support from local residents in Buildwas, for instance, or Leighton, or what happens in other quarry schemes in Shropshire is that they would report a vehicle registration number, and it doesn't require a CCTV camera to be there. If they get a registration number and that's going in the wrong direction, it's attributable to this site, and the livery of the vehicles would be clear to identify them, so local residents would be able to identify them. Then, as Mr. Ball mentioned, the 3 strikes and you're out policy would apply, and those vehicles would be reprimanded and subject to appropriate penalty. And this works at other Shropshire quarries, Chair. Thank you, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Right, members. Councillor Tyndall, please.
I see no point in deferring this to wait for the outcome of the first application we considered this afternoon. If our decision is to approve it, then I think that will be held sort of in abeyance or in escrow until such time as consent is given to the first application. If I'm correct in that, then I would propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Have we got a seconder for that? Councillor Ignat.
Thank you, Chair. Shropshire is blessed with many quarries, perhaps more than many other counties, of particularly good minerals, including stone, gravel and sand. I think it is vitally important, especially in view of the fact that our building trade in this country is playing catch-up at the moment due to the pandemic, and we should support the building trade in this country. We shouldn't lose, hide or sterilise a valuable resource like this. I accept what the officers have said about the amount of extraction that will take place. I'm slightly concerned about all the concerns by parish councils around about HGV movements, particularly because 75% of it is hopefully going to be moved by rail, and you wouldn't get that opportunity in many quarries. The traffic movements could be as low as 1 every 18 minutes, according to the report. And so in my opinion, that doesn't justify looking towards a refusal of this. So I'm happy to second Councillor Tyndall's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments, please? Right, we've got a proposal and a seconder for the application, the officer's recommendation. All those in favour, please. That's unanimous. Thank you. That's unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, date of the next meeting is June the 22nd at 1 o'clock at the theatre. I'd like to thank the officers and the staff for all the hard work they've done in putting this together. I'd like to thank all those for attending the site meeting yesterday, and may wish you all a safe journey home, and we'll see you next week. Are there any site visits proposed at the moment or not? You know. Go on. Sorry? Yeah.
Can we end the live feed now? Thank you.